It was spring of 1998, and I, a then 15-year-old female, was a high school sophomore. I had an argument with my mother late in the evening and decided to leave the house and take a walk around town to clear my head after. I walked from my suburban neighborhood about 2 miles to downtown and looped around to walk home again. It must have been around midnight, on my way back and about a half-mile from home, when I noticed a pickup truck with a shell on the back pass me by slowly a few times along a main street with no other cars around. Once I realized it was the same vehicle, after the third time passing me, the primal fear set in. Maybe the driver was lost? No. I felt my heart racing, my body went numb. When the truck passed me a fourth time, it didn't stop, but I could tell whoever was driving it was definitely scoping me out. It drove off again, but I heard it turn around once more over the crest in the hill as I was walking up. I ran for my life behind a building on the main street and into a neighborhood where I chose to trespass into a residential property to avoid this person in the truck who was following me. I heard the truck drive by with the engine roaring, accelerating down this small residential street as I hid in the bushes of someone's yard, terrified. The truck began scouting this neighborhood. When it turned onto another street away from me, I ran down the block further towards home until I was safe, but shaken by the experience. A little over a year later, a local man called Rex Krebs was arrested and charged with the abduction, rape, and unaliving of 2 young women from the same part of town where I had my experience being followed. One of the murder locations being about 4 blocks from where I hid in the bush while being followed. The newspaper ran a huge story on the case and included the article's photo, the killer's pickup truck that he used to abduct his 2 victims. And what do you know? It was the same truck that was following me that one night. It just goes to show how close I was from probably ending up dead, all because of an argument with my mother. I had just finished my courses of the year, and summer was right around the corner, so it meant that it was time to catch up with some of my friends. On this particular occasion, it was Nathan. Nathan was my best friend at the time, and we would sometimes spend months without seeing each other, but when we did hang out, we would always do the same thing. Go get some snacks, catch up over coffee before sunset, then walk around town until around 9 p.m. and call it a day. This time, though, nothing felt unusual. From the moment I saw him, something in my stomach just dropped. It wasn't him per se. We were on good terms, but something about hanging out that day felt off. Right as I greeted him with a handshake and went to our usual spot for coffee. We got there and things went by the books. I shook it off as me being nervous because I hadn't seen him in a long time. That was of course until Nathan mentioned that he felt like things around us were weird. Another drop in my stomach, but I kept my cool, trying not to sound too paranoid or something, but I guess I couldn't help it. "You feel it too?" I asked. He nodded. He said that he couldn't pinpoint what was wrong, but it was like our surroundings were odd, even hostile, even when there was nothing to fear. Was this some sort of shared paranoia? Was the end of the year getting to us? We didn't know, but we were sure that it was the first time we felt something like that. We finished our coffee and felt like maybe having a walk that wasn't going to be our best idea. Maybe we should call it a day now and just go back to our homes while there was still light. At that moment, my dad called me and asked if I could find out the price of a phone he was thinking about buying. So we were going to the store. In my mind, I kept thinking, yeah, I'll ask about this and then we'll split. But no, for some reason, and even after what we felt, decided to do our long walk until dark. This was my last chance to turn back before it all went down. We used to walk around this boulevard that wasn't really a dangerous area during a normal weekend. It used to be filled with teenagers and young adults sitting on the grass division in the middle, drinking or smoking and listening to music. It was a Saturday at 8:30 p.m., completely empty. I like to think that it was my last warning. As we passed a corner, I noticed two other guys who were coming from it as we crossed the street and kept walking straight. I looked over my shoulder, and I noticed that they were behind us. They were probably around our age, maybe older. Now, something that doesn't normally trigger my red flags, but did with these two. What set me off is that they weren't talking like us. They were dead silent. Secondly, their pace was off. They weren't trying to pass us, but they didn't stay way behind either. They were keeping distant. We were completely alone on that street, the four of us, and as we approached the end of the boulevard, which goes down into a big park, I warned Nathan, "Hey, these two behind us, they might be onto something." Nathan looked over his shoulder and then back at me and said, "Want to cross the street just to be sure?" I nodded, and we did so. We crossed the grass area in the middle and onto the other side and kept walking forward down the street. And that was when I saw it and when my heart, gut, and every organ in my body knew before my brain could process it. The guys on the other side upped their pace. One of them grabbed something from the fanny bag he had on his chest and went ahead of his friend. Before I could react, the guy crossed the street in front of us and said, "Boys, keep it quiet or we'll shoot you both dead," as his partner approached us too. My vision went blurry. I couldn't see their faces anymore. All I could see was that they were in front of us, threatening to end our lives, and seemingly armed. I froze. My entire life flashed before me. My parents, my girlfriend, the dog we had just rescued that I was happy to see every time I got home. What was the last thing I had said to any of them? And knowing that I would probably never see them again. In a panic, I gave one of them my phone and raised my hand, but Nathan managed to snap and ran away while I stayed frozen, with those two knobheads threatening us and telling him to come back. It wasn't until he yelled "run" that I snapped to and ran towards him. I tripped not far from where I started, and I heard from behind me, "Shoot him now!" And I thought, that's it, that's how I go. But I gathered my strength and got up. I kept running, expecting to hear a gunshot behind me and fall to my death, but it never rang. We ran all the way back. I was finally able to talk again, but all I could muster was, "Help, please," at the top of my lungs. We ran a few blocks until we stopped from exhaustion. Nathan had lost his glasses back at the boulevard and wanted to go back, because he couldn't see without them and getting a new pair was very expensive. But I refused, and told him I would stay here and wait for help or the police. But eventually he convinced me and we went back carefully, to the places where our lives changed forever. Lucky enough he found them, and those two guys were long gone. You know, I feel that everything that happened before that horrific moment was some kind of warning sign trying to stop us from going there. Hell, when the dust settled and people started showing up in the boulevard, the same kind of people I described earlier, we came across a woman who was waiting for her husband to get out of work. And upon hearing what happened, she offered us a ride to my house and we accepted. When we got there, I hugged my mum like I'd never done so in my life, and was so thankful for being able to do so. Needless to say, the 5th of November changed me forever. I know that it could have happened on any date, any hour or anywhere, but it would never be a normal day for me again. Nathan and I drifted apart, not because of this, but our friendship was never really the same afterwards, especially with me refusing to go around these areas at night, especially if we were walking. I will never ever ignore that feeling again, and if your gut tells you that something is off, trust me, it is. I had one of the most terrifying stalking experiences 12 years ago. I was an 18-year-old female at the time, and The Great Gatsby movie with Leonardo DiCaprio had been released. Being really young, inexperienced, and very naive about how to remain safe with unwanted attention, I made every mistake in the book with a guy who was 23 at the time that started stalking me. I had just graduated high school, and took a job at a health food store in my downtown area. It was my first customer service job. The owner was a big hippie who was easy to work with and flexible with hours. At first, I worked different shifts, eventually taking the afternoon to closing hours. Due to how small the store was, I was alone without other co-workers, only our owner sporadically dropping in to grab items off the shelf for her personal use, then leaving after about half an hour or so. As a side note, our store was situated next to the building that had subsidized housing for those recently released from incarceration or lower income. The evening/nighttime hours were risky for young women to be out without a male escort. Every restaurant in the downtown area had staff that escorted girls to their cars, as it was common to be followed with assaults happening after dark. I was on edge during closing, but felt some reassurance, as I had parked immediately outside our back exit, just a few feet from the door. But I was in the store closing out the register, cleaning and locking up every night alone. The front of the store was where the cash register was set up, but your back was to the large window that was right next to the sidewalk. The register faced the inside of the store, and it wasn't uncommon for me to feel people watching me and catch creepy guys looking at me through the window right behind where I was standing. Again, young and inexperienced, I didn't voice my fears or report the randos that would be a foot away watching me, only separated by the glass window. I picked up a shift during the summer farmers market in the morning. It was a great day. I was so happy to work in the morning and have a higher flow of customers, and one guy called Cam came into the store with a brochure for a local event at a spiritual center in the downtown area. I was pleasant, smiling, and got permission for us to post it on our register. He was obviously high, nothing crazy, and looked chill. You could tell he was in his own world. We spoke for maybe 5 minutes, and I didn't think much of the encounter and moved on with my day. On my next shift, Cam comes into the store. He struck up a conversation and was trying to keep my attention. Again, working in the afternoon when we had maybe 2 or 3 people come in before close, he just hung out right at the register. I was trying to give hints that I needed to focus on work, but he would just follow me around the store while commenting on how gorgeous my legs were and that he thought I had been an angel the last time he saw me. He kept telling me he had a spiritual awakening because I had shown him interest in how nice I was, insisting I was flirting and that the sun behind my head made my hair glow like a halo. Again, young and not experienced with guys, I was equally creeped out, but also a little flattered because I'd never had that kind of attention. I thanked him for the compliments, didn't call out that they were inappropriate, just made the same excuse that I needed to focus and walked away. Per usual, he just shadowed me everywhere I went, watching me but not really talking anymore. I was getting really freaked out. I let him know he was loitering and needed to leave unless he was there to shop. Given how pricey the items were, I figured it would deter him. He ended up using his food stamps to buy 1 soda or piece of candy every hour, maybe $3 spent an hour, and he'd make the excuse he was a customer. I went to the bathroom to at least get some privacy. My boss had seen him hanging out in the store before but never commented. I called her and told her that I was getting scared by this guy, letting her know he was making an excuse to stay by buying 1 cheap item and insisting he was a customer through the whole of my shift. I really thought she'd give me support and come to the store. She was a self-proclaimed feminist that espoused consent and boundaries, so I got major whiplashed when she defended his presence. She told me the store was in the red and on the brink of needing to close. Because he was spending any money, I shouldn't try to push him out the store. I tried arguing that he wasn't generating significant income, and she just doubled down that money was money, and then insisted I was overthinking it, and Cam was just a kind soul that had found a similar soul bond with me, and that created positive energy in the store. What the hell? So, there was a roadblock there. All I could do was carry on. The idea of quitting didn't even cross my mind, being my first job. I was worried it would look bad if I left only after a few months, and it was really hard to find a local position that was flexible with school hours, and I would be starting my first semester at the local college soon. Things slowly escalated. Cam started bringing me flowers every day. He would leave long notes confessing his love and insisting we were soulmates. Then he'd randomly play The Great Gatsby soundtrack. He would go on and on telling me that he was Gatsby and I was his Daisy. We were destined to be together, and that my denial of our bond was just like Gatsby's attempt to get Daisy. We were living out the movie, but our ending would be the coming together of souls wrapped in passion. He had this crazed look in his eyes every time he brought it up. Then he started just calling me Daisy. Any time another customer would come in, he would get angry and jealous that I ignored him and walked away. He started calling himself my bodyguard and told me it was his duty to beat up anyone that looked at me wrong or made a pass at me that would be a threat to our love. Again, I want to emphasize that I was so stupid for not quitting this job or telling anyone about this. It was an understatement that I was a complete dumbass for not making police reports, documenting things, or creating boundaries, leaving my job, or telling my friends, parents, or co-workers. For a few weeks he didn't show up. I thought there would finally be a break or he lost interest. Then he showed back up, told me he was hospitalized. Great. The same routine started all over again. Then one day I get a text from an unknown number. It was Cam. Not only did he get my number from a co-worker who he lied to saying he had a new phone and lost my number, but he did a reverse search and found my address. He didn't have transportation and I was on the other side of town. We didn't have a bus system and it was too far to walk. As far as I know, he never came to my house, but I'm sure he did, and I just wasn't aware. I didn't block his number. Again, that was so dumb, but honestly I was so scared because he knew where I lived and was so entrenched in this idea that we were bound to be together. I thought things would escalate more. I either ignored his texts or made dumb excuses for not responding. I would be curt and he wouldn't take the hint. When I started my semester at school, it got worse again. He formed a group of friends and told me he'd introduce them. First, he wanted me to go to his apartment. When I insisted I wouldn't, he brought them to the store. I stupidly thought they were nice people, but they sided with him, saying that he was a really nice guy and that I should give him a chance. Told me he was just being melodramatic and liked playing out fantasies, but that he wasn't a bad guy. A few days later, Cam told me he was concerned for my safety with the darker evenings. He told me he'd have his friends posted outside the front and back of the store to make sure I was safe. And they did, and it was freaky as hell. Now, growing up in a household of abuse, I didn't register the damage of this situation. I was accustomed to bad things happening to me, and was still stuck in a compliant/submissive response mode. This behavioral pattern didn't make me fight the setup. They started bringing more deliveries of gifts from me to Cam, and the 5 of them now loitered in the store with Cam during my shifts, each of them buying one thing each hour to remain customers. It was getting too scary. 6 guys in the store, me, alone, young female, exits being blocked by them as they insisted they were my bodyguards who would watch the doors. My nightly habit became kicking them out, locking the store and finishing my work in the dark so they couldn't see me inside, and then stay in the building for 2 hours so they'd go away. It worked for a week. Then one night I stepped out the door and all of them were either leaning against the wall by the exit door or leaning on my car smoking and drinking. Cam came and tried to hug me with his buddies whooping in the background. He reeked of weed and alcohol, and honestly I thought they were going to grab me and force me into the apartment. I made my car alarm go off, and it scared them enough that I was able to jump in, lock the doors, and floor out of the parking lot. I didn't give notice, I just told the owner I was done, and didn't tell anyone about what happened. Cam kept trying to text me, told me I was denying our destiny and wasn't going to give up on us. I stopped responding. Then I blocked his number. Then he'd get new numbers and text again. His texts got more threatening. As I ignored him, I started hearing cars drive by at odd hours of the night, and he would text me to let me know he was still my dedicated protector and make sure I was safe. It was obvious one of his buddies was giving him rides to snoop at my house. All of a sudden, it all stopped. Radio silence, and I was so relieved. 6 months went by with nothing. Then, there was a random phone call from another unknown number. I was in group chats with other students for projects and thought it was one of them calling me, but it was Cam. He told me he violated his parole and was in jail the last 6 months. He had thought of me every day. I was his Daisy, and he was going to come for me. We would finally be together, and he'd prove to me that we had an undeniable love, that I would love his male member, and already was fantasizing about it while in jail. As you could imagine, I was just pale as a ghost and speechless. All I could think was to fake a story about going abroad for study in 2 weeks. He started screaming at me for running away from our connection. He said he'd find me and come after me no matter where I went. I just hung up the phone, trashed it, and got a new phone with a new number, deleted my Facebook, and finally moved to a large city an hour away. I had to upend my entire life because of this worthless piece of trash, and I was so inexperienced and naive. I made so many mistakes. I was just glad the worst-case scenarios never played out, and it was a steep learning curve that taught me how to protect myself in the future. That wasn't the last of my weird encounters. One guy at college who transferred to the larger university from our local college got a similar fixation on following me to the larger campus. He had a fetish for being stalked. He would find me in the school union and talk about how hot it would be if he found me going through his trash in the middle of the night. Thankfully, it was a huge campus and I got friends enlisted to watch out for him and let me know where to avoid. But Christ, there are so many creeps out there, and it really sucks being a woman. I was in Barcelona with a few friends, and like most trips, the night started off completely normal and harmless. We had spent the day doing the usual tourist stuff, and by the time night rolled around we were already a few drinks in and just looking for somewhere casual to keep things going. We ended up in this small, very local bar tucked away from the main streets. It wasn't sketchy at first glance, but somewhat dimly lit, and filled with regulars who clearly all knew each other. The bartender took an interest in us pretty quickly, probably because we were outsiders and foreign, and started chatting with us while pouring drinks. At first, it felt like good luck. He was talkative and friendly and kept the drinks coming. We were joking around, trying to piece together conversations through broken Spanish and English, and it felt really good. That's when he told us about another bar he liked, somewhere better and more fun. He said he'd take us there himself once he finished his shift. Looking back, that should have been the moment just to say no, and we were good, but we didn't. By the time he closed up, my two friends were a lot more drunk than I was, and I was just buzzed enough to go along without really questioning anything. We stepped outside with him, he flagged down a taxi, and we all piled in together like it was the most normal thing in the world. At first, the drive didn't feel strange. It was just city streets passing, lights, the usual late-night traffic. But after a while, I started to notice how long we'd been driving. The buildings started to thin out, the lighting changed. It slowly stopped feeling like we were just heading to another bar nearby. I leaned forward and asked how far this place was, but he didn't answer. He just laughed and said something to the driver in Spanish, who laughed as well. There was something about the way they laughed that didn't feel like a joke I was in on. It felt like I'd missed something important, or worse, that I wasn't supposed to understand it. I looked out the window again, and now it was undeniable. We were leaving the city. The streets were darker and more spaced out, and there were stretches where there was almost nothing around us. We stopped at a red light, and without thinking about it, I shoved the door open and physically pushed my two friends out the car, telling them to run. They stumbled, confused, not fully understanding the situation, but followed my lead. Once I got right out behind them and slammed the door, we just moved. The taxi didn't follow us and just drove off, and we were standing there in the middle of somewhere we didn't recognize with no real sense of where we were. The roads were mostly empty. And then we got lucky. Another taxi came down the road and we flagged it down. The driver stopped, rolled down his window and immediately looked confused, and we piled in and began explaining where we needed to go. We told him where we'd come from and he looked genuinely surprised and slightly concerned and asked how we ended up there. When we told him the story, he shook his head and explained that we were further away than we should have been, especially from where we started. He was actually on his way home and done for the night, but after hearing our story agreed to take us back into the city anyway. We never found out where that first taxi was taking us, and maybe it was nothing, but I personally think they were in on something and wanted to get 3 drunk women whisked away to somewhere to do who knows what to them, or maybe even trafficked. I'm glad I never found out what. Be careful with your drinks while abroad, ladies. For context, my best friend and I are both from London, but her family on her dad's side is from Ireland, so she goes there every summer for the entire summer. Last summer, I went to go and stay with her for 2 weeks at her grandfather's house. Her grandfather lives in rural, like proper rural Ireland. The town is at least a 40-minute drive away, and his house is the only building within the area. It backs onto a massive forest and faces onto a lake. It's really quite beautiful, but that's beside the point. My best friend's granddad, brother, aunt, and dad were going to the pub one evening. They invited us, which of course was a tempting offer, but we declined, as we were excited at the prospect of having the house to ourselves. So, we decided to have a chill evening in and basically play house. Of course, if you've been to Ireland, you know that a quick pint is anything but quick, and her family had been gone for some time at this point, which was at least a few hours. It was approaching 10 p.m. We were watching a movie in her living room when we heard a knock on the door. We reckoned maybe it was her family who'd forgotten their keys, so we went to answer. Her grandfather's front door led into the conservatory, which then led to the actual front door of the house, so we made it into the conservatory door, expecting her family. But instead, there was a man at the door. Slightly confused, we kind of looked at him, waiting for him to say something, during which I had to take in his appearance. There was something off about him, to say the least. He looked insane, bizarrely alert, and yet slightly scary. I can't quite explain it adequately. He said his car had broken down, and he needed to use the phone to call someone to pick him up. I looked out, but couldn't see a car at all, and said something to the effect of, "Where's your car?" He responded by explaining that it had broken down about 30 minutes down the road and had walked and walked until he finally fell upon this house. Given that, as I explained prior, my friend's granddad lived in a fairly remote area, so this was plausible. With a slight hesitation, my friend passed him her phone and said he could use it to call, and waited on the doorstep. He didn't accept the offer. Instead, he just kind of ignored it and started asking if there were any adults or parents in the house. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt and assumed he was asking this as maybe he felt more comfortable sharing his predicament with adults rather than 2 teenage girls. We didn't know if we should tell him if we were alone or not, because we would usually know better, but given the situation, we explained they were out but be back soon. That's when he started to look past us and into the house itself, and began insisting that we let him into the house, as he wanted to use the landline. At this point, we were more than suspicious, because if he wanted to call someone, why not just use my friend's phone? He was erratic, continuously insisting that we let him in. At that point, my friend said he could either use her mobile or leave, but beyond that, there was nothing more we could do for him. He insisted he come into the house, so we just shut the door on him and locked it, then locked the door to the actual house. Freaked out, we sat in her living room trying to peep out the window and see if he had gone. He lingered for a bit, looking into the windows to try and find another way in. But then we saw him leave, though we couldn't make out in which direction he had gone. We were scared as hell. To add fuel to the fire, my friend explained that the nearby town was pretty small, and everyone in the area pretty much knew each other. She had never seen him in his life, which scared her the most, as she was well acquainted with the entire town by now. We contemplated calling her dad, but since it had been about 30 minutes with no disruption, we just left it and continued on with our night. Later on, her dog was getting restless, and her family was still out, so he let her into the back garden. After about 5 minutes, we heard her barking, but it was too dark to see what she was barking at, so we put it down to more than likely being a goat, because that was usually the case. We called her in and went about our night. We realized her family probably wouldn't be back until the early hours, and instead of waiting for them, we decided to head for bed. I went into the kitchen, which is in the back of the house, to get some water, when I heard someone shaking the handle on the back door, trying to get in. The thing is, it's a really old house, so I didn't exactly put all my faith into the door holding up against the weight of what I suspected to be a grown man. I screamed bloody murder, and my friend ran down the stairs. At this point, he was banging on the door like his life depended on it, and I swear to God, I felt my heart fall out my butthole. My friend shouted back that she was going to call the police, which was a lie as she'd taken her phone upstairs, but she thought it could deter him. Luckily, this seemed to scare him off. He stopped banging. We heard his footsteps retreat further and further away until we could no longer hear them. We were frozen in fear and couldn't even speak to each other. Then we heard the front door open and pretty much thought that was it for us. On instinct, my friend grabbed a knife and we hid in the pantry. You can only imagine our relief when we heard her dad calling out for us saying they were back. We were absolutely dazed, and I'm sure they could tell. So we frantically asked them, "Did you see a car on your way here, a broken down one?" They responded that they didn't, and I swear to God I defecated myself there and then. So to the strange man who tried to break into my best friend's granddad's house at night, let's never meet again. I used to work as a supervisor for a janitorial company, and a couple of times a week I'd be assigned to a middle school to clean the hallway floors in the gymnasium. They had this big floor scrubbing machine, basically a Zamboni for tile, and once I got the hang of it I could finish my route pretty fast. Most nights I had the entire school to myself. When I wrap up early, I'd usually head to the library, sit in the back by the big windows and eat my dinner while I read. It was quiet in a way you don't really get during the day, with just the hum of the building and the echo of my footsteps. So the morning after one of my shifts there, my phone rang. It was school security asking me to come in. Their tone alone told me it wasn't routine. When I pulled into the lot, I saw a police car parked out front, and my stomach dropped. Inside, they started with basic questions. Did you notice anything unusual last night? Did you see anyone around? Stuff like that. I told them no. Honestly, I rarely noticed much at all. I usually had headphones in while I worked, the machine droning underneath whatever I had listening to. They then brought me into the security office and pulled up a camera feed. On the screen was footage from the previous night. There I was, riding the scrubber down one of the main hallways, and not far from me, close enough that if I'd have turned my head, I might have seen movement, someone was slipping into the classroom, clear as day. They had broken in while I was right there. They showed me the rest of the footage. I stayed in the building for another 2 hours after that, completely unaware. Nothing was stolen and nothing was disturbed, and then came the part that still weirds me out. There's no footage of them leaving. No sign of the door they used being opened again. Security and police had to sweep the entire school from top to bottom, every classroom, every storage room, every stairwell. They never told me if they found anything or anyone, and I never got any follow-up. All I know is that someone was in that building with me the whole time, close enough to hear the machine whirring down the halls, and I had absolutely no idea. I'm not sure if I was in any danger, but it's an unsettling thought, because who knew what kind of intentions they had, why they were there to begin with, or what they'd have done with me if I was inconveniencing what they were planning to do. I am a female of 21 years and work in the hospitality industry, specifically doing graveyard shifts, usually from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I've seen and dealt with some of the most insane experiences, and at this point could probably write a book. But this particular experience was one that was the most frightening. I was brought up to be caring, empathetic, and understanding. These core values mean a lot to me, and I live by them. On numerous occasions, I've been told that constantly having this mentality can lead me to being targeted by people with ill intentions, and I didn't believe that. It's nice to be nice after all. But in hindsight, after everything that's happened, I've learned to be a bit more skeptical. Usually on these graveyard shifts, there were 2 of us in the building at all times, and when we finish our work, we're basically free to sit down and relax for the remainder of our shift, or at least until the morning manager arrived at roughly 6 a.m. So, I did just that. Finished my tasks and sat down in the main area of the building to have a late night snack and watch some reels on my phone, as you do. My co-worker decided he would take a nap, as it was roughly 3 a.m. at this point and nobody was around. Fine by me. About 20 minutes passed when I heard a commotion near the bar area. Obviously, I looked up from my phone, only to meet the eyes of this man of about 40, standing at the bar counter. This wasn't unusual. Oftentimes, people would come down and grab some water or a smoke before heading back to bed. I thought nothing of it, and went back to doom scrolling on my phone. Sorry, excuse me. I let out a sigh, thinking to myself, what could this man possibly want from me at 3:30 a.m.? I stood up and asked if he was okay, and apologized for being on my phone, hoping he wouldn't complain to my manager in the morning. He responded, but I couldn't quite pick up what he was saying. I walked over to the bar and kindly asked him to repeat himself, apologizing for not hearing him. Is it okay if I have some water? He was shaking, almost nervous, soft-spoken, and honestly non-threatening, especially seeing as he was about 6 foot tall and I'm only 5 foot tall. Of course, I said, and went to walk away when he stopped me. I'm sorry. Is it okay if I talk to you for a while? My mum's dying in hospital, and I can't sleep. Looking back, I'm kicking myself for not making up some excuse about needing to do work, but I agreed to stay and talk with him. Stupid empathy. He asked if I smoked, and I did, so I said yes. Then he asked me to step outside to smoke and chat, to which I stupidly agreed. We spoke about his mum, and I tried my best to comfort him. I had just recently had someone pass away, so this topic of conversation hit particularly hard. He thanked me for being so kind and continued to talk about his life, how he used to be homeless, but he moved in with his sister and got back on his feet, and that they were both staying here due to the circumstances, but were not from this city. I listened and occasionally responded by nodding. It was a polite conversation, but then something changed. Are there cameras out here? I wouldn't want you to get in trouble for being out here. How this didn't register in my mind as a red flag is unbelievable. How gullible can you be? Anyway, thankfully I didn't respond with yes or no. I just assured him I wouldn't be in trouble for smoking outside. And yet he seemed disappointed with my answer. I presume because he didn't get any information about where the cameras were placed. The conversation kept getting weirder and creepier. None of this I realized. I just saw a sad man needing a friend. Eventually, some form of fight or flight activated in my brain. I told him I was cold and I was going in. Come, let me give you a hug, it'll warm you up. What the hell? At this point I'm creeped out, but I'm thinking maybe he's just bad at picking up on social cues or something, so I respectfully declined and walked inside. He followed. He asked if he could grab a coffee and sit with me for a while, and me being me, and on the verge of a panic attack, and not wanting to get on this guy's bad side, I agreed. We sat there, and he continued to ask odd questions. Did I have kids? Did I want kids? If I had a boyfriend? I told him I had a fiancée, which was a lie, and he asked if I loved him. He went on to say, I mean no harm in asking these questions. You're just so beautiful. At this point, my brain was screaming at me to get out of this situation. I had to think quickly. Come and sit next to me. I won't bite. Hell no. I quickly made up the excuse that I had to get the area ready for the morning and that my manager would be showing up any minute. At the same time, my co-worker woke from his nap and passed by to get a coffee. That startled the man and he stood up before saying, Tell your mum I was asking for her, forcing a hug, and left to go to his room. Oh my God. He was pretending to be a family friend so that my co-worker wouldn't be suspicious of him. I stood there in shock, not even able to speak. My brain was still trying to process what exactly the hell just happened. I kept quiet, helping my co-worker set up for the morning as it was now 5:30 a.m., and I was dealing with this man for 2 hours. I sat down at 5:30 and waited for my manager to show up so I could finally go home, hoping that man wouldn't come back before I had to leave. Wishful thinking. He showed up behind me out of nowhere. Think I'll go to the shops. I'm out of smokes. Okay, why did I need to know this? I kept silent before he asked me for my pen, which I gave him, and he walked off again. He returned 5 minutes later and gave me back my pen. I wrote a note for you. He stood so close to me and then dropped a piece of cardboard behind my back and walked away. In hindsight, I see how sneaky this was. He made sure no one could see him drop that note. I picked it up. It was pretty weird, but one line in particular made my skin crawl. Wear tighter work pants for me next time. They look good. I ran into the office and sat in the front of the CCTV monitor, seeing exactly where he was. He was standing outside the building, waiting and pacing. Then he walked back into the building and on camera, I could see he was looking for me. But thankfully at this point, I was in the office, so he walked back outside, started pacing again, and waiting, before hiding himself out of sight behind a corner. I told my manager, who told me to exit via the back entrance, which I did. I was shaking, checking behind me every few seconds, every noise making me run faster until I eventually reached the safety of my home. I sat down, processing what had just happened, when suddenly my phone vibrated. Hey Anna, thanks for the chat. Talk soon. Winky face. How the hell did he get my number? I've never blocked someone faster in my life. I told the higher-ups what happened, and didn't return to work for at least a month, until he was permanently barred from my workplace. I still fear I'll see him somewhere and he'll be waiting for me. Thankfully, I haven't seen him since, and don't wish to, and I hope to never meet him again. I took on a house/pet sitting job for the weekend after my birthday. It was for a friend, and the dogs and cat are all super sweet, and I was happy to do it. I was already reeling from another scary encounter that had just happened to me on my birthday itself, so it was a welcome respite to have a mini vacation where I had a house to myself. It was the first night there. I'd come back from a family member's birthday party, and it was too early to curl my hair, so I was watching Ginny and Georgia on the living room TV. For reference, the TV was next to the front door, with the guest bathroom I was using within 3 feet. It was about 10 p.m, and I paused the show to pee. Dogs were asleep on the other side of the house, both older and one with mobility issues, and shortly after locking the door and sitting down, I heard something. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, as I've been through several break-ins and attempts, but then I heard the door open and footsteps on the laminate flooring. And if you know how loud they are. Then I heard a man cough, distinctly, perhaps 15 feet from where I was. I frantically texted my mum to call the cops, thinking I should be as quiet as possible. But then when she didn't answer, I heard the footsteps coming closer. I panicked and called myself. Keep in mind, after my first situation, I became very particular. When I house sit, the first thing I do is check all the windows and doors and secure all entry points, as my dad taught me this growing up. I know everything was locked, but I'm sobbing on the phone and panicking on the toilet seat, hoping the cops get here in time and that I don't end up another statistic. Then I hear the footsteps recede and the back door close. The operator informed me the cops were there, but that I'd have to come out to let them in. I've got some really bad stories, but unlocking that door and running to the front door to unlock it and basically falling outside was up there for most terrifying moment of my life. They checked the house. They didn't believe me. The back door was not particularly secure, as it's the same kind I have in my bedroom at my place. It's the kind you can turn the lock and close behind you, so of course the place looked locked up. Once again, I slept with a knife under my pillow, and I slept for maybe 45 minutes that night. I don't know who the man was who wanted to try and burgle the house, but I hope I never meet you. At the time I was 13, my friend just turned 16. We are both female. Me and my friend Amy were both bored at home, and my dad was away from the house, leaving just us there. So we wanted to go shopping in this one shop I told her about. It was getting a bit late, like maybe about 7 p.m, but we figured it could still be open. However, this shop was quite far from the house, but I knew a shortcut. That being through the woods, taking that shortcut was my biggest mistake. We left the house, and it was still fairly bright outside. We were just walking and talking and went through the woods. There's rarely anyone there, apart from maybe some old man walking his dog, and I always used to go through those woods as a child, with my parents, and I always thought of it as being safe. We mindlessly walk until I notice a man with his hood up smoking. I whisper to Amy, "Hey, look," and she grabbed my arm just to be safe, and we both went around him so he wouldn't see us, but we are pretty sure he did. The sun begins to set and we reach the shop, only to realize it's closed, so we turn back the same way we came from. We completely forget about the encounter we had about 10 minutes ago, and we just laugh and talk. I look in front of us where we're walking, and we see someone. I'm 90% sure it was the same guy, and I freeze. Amy tracks where I'm looking, and she grabs my arm again, and we go off the trail to some place that I didn't recognize. We ran for a bit, then went back on the trail thinking we lost him. We look back, He's right behind us, sprinting full speed towards us. Amy, still clinging to my arm, begins running and pulling me with her. She asks me which way should we turn, while pointing towards the woods and then pointing to some area I didn't really know how to get back home from. Now it was dark out. Obviously we wouldn't go into the woods. Without thinking, we went towards the area I didn't really recognize. We keep running, keep looking back, and he's still there. We see some lady in the distance and we immediately rush to her. My throat was so sore I could barely breathe. This lady was on her phone, just standing there, and we tell her, "We're being chased, please can we stay with you for a while?" And this woman pays us no mind, as if this is normal. At least that was the last time we saw the man. Amy tries getting her phone out, but it's dead. I got mine, but I have no data, and can't go on Google Maps to find our way home. I knew the area we were in, I just wasn't sure how to get back home from there. I look around us and we begin to walk the way I thought was right. Finally, we walked until I recognized where we were, so I led the rest of the way, still paranoid that he would be behind us. We kept looking back. In order to get back home, we were forced to go the rest of the way through the woods. I thought this was a terrible idea, but at least I wasn't alone. After all, I saw her as a big sister, and don't know what would have happened if she wasn't there. We go through the woods. I pull out my phone flashlight because at this point it's pitch dark and I'm shaking, and Amy was also tense. We eventually made it back home safely, and we never told anyone this story. We weren't even supposed to leave the house, especially as it was getting dark. This experience stayed with us. Anyway, a few months after this happened, I was watching some YouTube documentary about true crime stuff. It was based in the exact same area that I got chased. Even the images used in the video were of the literal same street we got chased on. And it was about some kid that apparently murdered his whole family over a video game. Very graphic stuff. I told my mum about it and she told me, "Didn't you know that area is dangerous? It's probably the most dangerous part of town." And I was shocked. I never shared the story of what happened to Amy and I. But after that, I did. Though I don't think she took it very seriously. To this day, I still think to myself, what would have happened if we hadn't have reacted quicker? I'm glad we never got to find out, though. I'm a 21-year-old female. I usually try not to go to the laundromat at night, but with it getting dark so early, it's basically impossible. And that was the situation tonight. I got there and was alone except for one guy smoking outside and a couple of employees cleaning stuff. Usually I sit in my car while I wait, but it's super cold so that wasn't really an option. I brought along some homework and sat in one of the chairs. The chairs are arranged in groups of 2, so I put my backpack in the seat next to me. I could see this guy staring at me through the window. There were still employees around though, so I wasn't too worried. A while later, he came in and walked around for a while. Before deciding to approach me, he told me I was being rude by taking up 2 chairs because what if he wanted to sit there? I basically told him there are other chairs and I could move to a different set if there was something special about these ones. He walked off and kept walking in circles around the building. A while later, the employees left. He came up to me again and pointed at my sweatshirt pocket and said, "You can keep that in your car, you know. You don't need it in here." What was in my pocket? Pepper spray. He was telling me to get rid of the pepper spray. I told him I didn't feel like it and would be keeping it. At this point, I was pretty eager to just get the hell out of there, and might have just gotten my car and pulled some laps around the block if it wasn't for the fact that the dryers don't lock, and I was paranoid about him going through my stuff. Luckily, he decided to go smoke again, and I escaped while he was gone. This happened to me in about 2021. There's a small bar in a small Iowa town that I absolutely adore. All the staff knew me well, and I was a frequent regular, even if I was just there to chill. I was out late one night. The tap water is bad, so I refused to drink it. If I wasn't going to drink it, I refused to give it to my cat. There's a water fountain at the park where the water is much more drinkable, So I saved some core water bottles from when I was buying normal water from the gas station and started my walk to collect water. I had to pass the bar to get there. It was a Friday night and the bar was bumping. I just had to go in again. There were some men who were there basically all the time. They were there that night. After the bar closed, I made my way to the park to collect the water. They had left before I did. The park was across the street and a block down to the right. The three of them were sitting and smoking, super drunk. They drank beer like it was water. They were sitting on some stairs on the entrance to a business directly across the street. I went to pass them and they asked, "Who are you? Are you new in town?" I didn't think much of it. It's a super small Iowa town and everyone knew everyone. I told them yes, I was in fact new in town. And they started asking personal questions, and I lied to them about everything I said. Mainly about if I had a partner, because they found me attractive. In the middle of this conversation, there was a screaming cat somewhere. It was so loud. I ended the convo and told them I really needed to go and get home to my cat, so I went into the park to get the water. It was pushing 4 a.m. at this point and it was dark. The street lights were a soft, ambient, warm orange, and there's little to no light pollution. You can barely see anything. While I was getting the water, I looked across the street and saw one of the men duck down behind a parked car like they tried to go inside of it. The car never made a noise or flash to indicate someone entered. I noted this, but didn't think too much of it. They're drunk and probably being weird. I left the park, and suddenly another one of the guys was sitting alone closer to me, away from the other two, sitting on a different set of stairs. He tried to make conversation again, but I kept walking. I again noted this, but still didn't think much of it. I didn't know where the third man was. Suddenly, the night shift cop I was acquainted to pulled up to me and asked if I was screaming for help and if the men were bothering me. I wasn't putting two and two together and told him no, but the screaming was just a cat. Several people called in that someone was screaming, but the cops were everywhere. He carried on and said to call him if I needed anything. I kept walking home. I crossed the street and slipped straight into pitch black darkness once I was back into a residential area. That was when I heard someone behind me go, "Psst." I turn around and it's the same guy by the car, doing the same thing as before. There was a third guy on the other side of the street. I walked faster. Then I heard someone clicking like they were calling a dog. It was the car guy. Then I saw the other man in the middle of the road going, "Psst." They started to walk faster towards me. It finally clicked. I bolted and took a different route, hiding in the dark and waiting for a while before running home. I never saw them again after that, which is abnormal. I also asked the bartender if they ever acted like that and she said they hadn't. I don't know why they never came back to the bar. Maybe they did, after I moved again or something. Glad I never had to find out though. I work full-time at a public university in the US as an office manager, and I'm enrolled into grad school at the same institution. I graduated this May. I have in-person night classes 3 days a week that start right after I get off work. My apartment is on the first floor of a complex about 10 minutes away. Over the past few months, I've had numerous bizarre occurrences around my home and workplace. The first, to my knowledge, was in September, and was something my neighbor across the hall, a very sweet older woman, told me. A man was banging on my door for around an hour just after midnight. I wasn't home. My neighbor poked her head out to ask him what was going on, and he said he was a DoorDasher with no food or bags in his hand. My neighbor watched him through the peephole and told me he tried the doorknob multiple times. As far as I know, he didn't come back, but I've also had 3 or 4 instances over this several-month period where someone knocked on my bedroom window, which have blackout curtains and are always closed, late at night, loud enough to wake me and my tiny dog, but I never saw who. A woman came to my sliding glass door about a month later, demanding to come in because her stolen device had apparently pinged in my apartment. When I refused, she called the sheriff's department. The deputy came, asked me a few questions and left, but did confirm the device was pinging my apartment. Never found out if she meant a phone or what. The woman hung out in the parking lot before leaving a few minutes later. Obviously, I'd never stolen any phone, so I was completely bewildered, and I never saw her again. In December, things came to a head when I found a plug-in GPS tracker in the OBD port under my dashboard. Car dealership where I got serviced last said they didn't use that brand, Land Air C, and yes, I have the model and serial number, and didn't perform any services that would have warranted putting it there. I called the cops, and they just wrote down a few details and left. University police were also informed since the tracker was probably placed either on campus or at my apartment. The tracker was the biggest red flag. I never checked my OBD port, so I have no idea how long it was there. I told my unit director, and he offered to subtly remove mentions of me around the office and the website, which I accepted. However, I was posted up at the office front desk for 80% of my day. This past Tuesday, right before I left for lunch, a middle-aged man came into the office wearing a hairnet, surgical mask, hoodie, and sunglasses. He claimed to be a prospective student and had questions about FAFSA. He was extremely hard to understand. I directed him to the financial aid office across campus, and he kept asking questions that our office could not answer. I thought, sure, fine, maybe harmless, but just not all there mentally. He walks over to our coffee machine and just starts making himself coffee. He's still there when I leave, and one of my staff watches the desk while I'm out. When I return from lunch, he's gone, but walks in after me a few minutes later and just sits in the lobby on his phone before getting up to leave almost immediately. I was off work Wednesday and Thursday and came in on Friday. I felt like giving my mostly undergrad staff a break, so gave them permission to head home early, inadvertently leaving me alone in the office. The man came back wearing the exact same clothes, mask, hairnet, sunglasses within 5 minutes of the office clearing out. Our office is technically open to the public, but isn't really public facing, and he had no reason for being there, especially that late in the day. He came in, barely acknowledged me, and said he was going to bring back bottled water for our coffee machine and left again. I'm very creeped out by this, so I messaged my director, and he got an IT guy from the adjacent building to come over with his laptop to keep me company. I explained the situation, and he said he'd stay with me till close. He settled in my director's office just around the corner, but it still looked like I was alone. The man returns, without water, and leans against the desk trying to start a conversation with me. An IT guy comes around the corner and stands between me and him, and he quickly changes the subject and asks about financial aid again, for the 4th time in many days, before being directed away and leaving immediately. I'm strongly considering informing campus police about this. Like I said, they already knew about the tracker. I've had problems in the past during my undergrad years in a different institution with men and women being creepy towards me, but nothing to this level, and I don't know what to do. Any advice on what I should do or change would be appreciated. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, you will enjoy the free stories I've got over on Patreon dropping tomorrow for free, a collection of Let's Not Meet stories. So if that interests you, hopefully I'll see you over there tomorrow, and I'll be back on Sunday for some middle of nowhere scary stories. I'd like to give one big thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. Your support really does go a hell of a long way, so thank you. But for now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.
Mortis Media.
Years ago, I would hang out with a buddy at his place. His dad was a construction pro who poured everything he had into the place where they lived, and we would spend hours in that gorgeous apartment-style basement playing PS2 or staging Nerf wars with his scary little brother who tried to seriously injure me on multiple occasions. The basement felt like its own little world, but it was just too quiet and too perfect, almost uncanny. like wandering into one of those backroom creepypasta nightmares, and no matter how many times I was down there, I could never shake the prickly sense that something just wasn't right. One afternoon, as his mum called me to the car for my ride home, I realized I'd left my jacket downstairs. I went back in. All the lights were off down there except for the TV blasting pure static, lighting up the walls. In the middle of the basement they had this odd pantry, and it was completely out of place. Its door was cracked open enough to see inside it a little, and it was just pitch black. It made my skin crawl. Brushing it off, I grabbed my jacket and I turned towards the stairs, and that's when I heard the softest creak. The pantry door, which had been still, was slowly opening on its own. I tried to walk up the steps, but the moment the door began to move, I was rooted in place. The door was not almost completely opened, and all I could see was pure darkness. After at least 40 seconds, something jolted me back, and I was able to book ass up the stairs. I was running up the stairs. It was like I could feel something right on my ass on the steps behind me. I ran clear through the house and out the door. I literally dove into his mother's car. I did not know what to say, so I sat there for a second, and I thought it must have been his crazy little brother. Seriously, this kid gave off serial killer vibes. I looked behind me to see him already sitting calmly in the back seat, where both my friend and his brother. I had no idea they were already in the car. There was literally no time for either of them to have run up those stairs and climbed into the car to scare or prank me. I told my friends about that a few days later, and sure enough, he said a lot of weird crap had happened in his house for years. I pray that dude is doing good in life today, and that he's not had any more hard experiences. I lived in a haunted house from the ages of 13 to 22, and during those years there were many witnesses to the strange events that took place there, including family members and friends who experienced things both during the day and late at night. Whatever it was that shared a space with us seemed to take a particular interest in my bedroom, almost as if it had claimed that room as its favorite spot. On the very first night we slept in that house, and then again on several scattered nights over the years, I woke up abruptly to the distinct sound of clothes hangers scraping roughly back and forth across a metal rod inside my closet. The harsh, grating noise unmistakable and continuous in the darkness right beside my bed. The creepy part about that sound was that there was absolutely no metal rod installed in that closet at all, only plastic-coated racks with spaced-out slots designed to hold individual hangers in fixed positions, which, theoretically, shouldn't have allowed them to slide around and clatter in that way. When I finally forced myself to get up and open the closet door to check, my hanging clothes were swaying back and forth, as if they had just been pushed or yanked roughly, the fabric still moving and settling while the room stayed otherwise still, and the sight of that made terror spike through me in a way I still remember vividly. On multiple other nights I woke up abruptly to the unmistakable sensation of something heavy sitting directly on my feet or at the very end of the bed, compressing the mattress and trapping my legs under sudden extra weight that hadn't been there when I fell asleep. Whenever I worked up the courage to look towards that area of the bed, either absolutely nothing was visible despite the continued pressure, or there would be this featureless, dense, shadowy mass perched at the foot, which I always felt was silently staring at me in a way that made my skin crawl. One of the worst incidents happened in broad daylight, while the house was full of people, which somehow made it even more unnerving than the nighttime encounters, because it shattered the illusion that daytime and company meant safety. My cousin and I were hanging out in my bedroom with the door closed, talking and just killing time. while my parents were throwing a small party downstairs. My sister was very obviously home as well, making plenty of noise down the hall in her own room. The house was old and large, and it had these heavy oak doors that tended to stick and resist being opened from time to time. Suddenly, all at once, the background noise of the party and my sister's movements vanished completely, leaving an unnatural silence hanging on the other side of my bedroom door. It was as if someone had muted the entire house. The sudden deadness of the air hit us both at the exact same moment, and we stopped talking mid-sentence to stare at each other with wide eyes, because we could each tell the other felt it too. I heard what I assumed were my dad's familiar footsteps coming up the stairs outside my room, the creaks falling in that same pattern I'd heard 1,000 times before. So I called out to him through the door expecting an answer, but nothing came back, not even the muffled sound of movement. Just that suffocating, unnatural silence pressing against the wood. I called again, louder this time, and my cousin whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath, as the tension ratcheted up another notch. Then, without warning, there was a sudden, fast rushing sound like a gust of wind or something barreling down the hallway, and something heavy slammed into my bedroom door, so hard the entire door frame vibrated violently around us. We shrieked at the top of our lungs from pure shock, clutching at each other in panic, and before we could recover from that first impact, it slammed into the door again with such ferocity that a visible line, long, jagged and cracked, split down the center of the thick oak panel, as though the wood itself were being forced apart. We screamed even louder, grabbing each other and crying hysterically. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the episode ended, and we could once again hear the party downstairs, and my sister moving around down the hall, as if nothing had happened at all. We yelled over and over for our parents and my sister, but apparently no one heard us through the house. So eventually we gathered enough courage to open the door, slip into the hallway, and bolt down the stairs to the party, where everyone looked up in confusion at the sight of us arriving tear-streaked and shaken. None of the adults or other guests had heard any slamming, rushing wind, or screaming, and they seemed genuinely surprised to find us so upset, insisting the last several minutes had been completely ordinary. No one believed our story, especially my sister, since she claimed she hadn't heard anything at all. But the long split down the center of that heavy oak door is still there, as physical evidence even now. I remember hearing and seeing that wood crack in real time under the impact, and although my dad later shrugged it off by saying me simply must have never noticed the crack before that day, my cousin and I both know exactly what happened. And 30 years later, she flatly refuses to even talk about that afternoon, or the house at all. My room was not very large at all. Just a typical square space mostly taken up by a dresser standing against one wall, and a bookshelf and a TV stand combo over by the corner. That was when my twin-size bed sat right in the middle, bisecting the room cleanly, separating the entrance door from the sliding door closet on the far side. I liked having the fan on back then since I was young, and it helped me sleep through the warm nights. I had one of those long extended chains hanging from the light so I could turn off the overhead light easily while keeping the fan spinning steadily above my head without missing a beat. So I was in my room messing around not long before bed that evening, playing like always. That was when I always stayed an active kid growing up, never anywhere in the house without a trusty toy sword or some toy sword standing close at hand. Tonight was no exception to that habit of mine, carrying through sword grip tight as I moved around the small space carelessly. I do not remember exactly why I swung it that hard, but my sword struck the chain next to the light dead on, sending it whipping up unexpectedly into the air above. Now, anyone who's ever accidentally whacked their own chain knows what comes right after without fail. The chain went flying up, wrapping itself endlessly around the light fixture up there, turning off all the lights suddenly in one twist. So in an instant, I stood plunged into total darkness, thick all around me, pressing close from every side. That was when, annoyed, I clambered onto my bed quickly, starting to reach up tentatively with one hand stretching high. I did not want to stick my fingers into the fan blades spinning steadily overhead at all, but needed to get really close just to begin untangling the mess above. I froze solid when I heard a shuffling sound close by, followed by a low groan echoing soft in the stillness with me. It sounded like the closet door sliding open on its own. That was when I kept trying to reach up carefully despite my heart picking up speed, and now the hairs on my arms stood straight on end, prickling cold. The groan of the door finally stopped after dragging along, but what replaced it was a heavy, throaty breathing sound that filled the dark space. So I imagined it, of course, like any kid would in the pitch darkness, since what boy did not have an overactive imagination? All the same, I felt terrified, unable to shake it off easily that night. That was when I gave up untangling the chain halfway through and reached instead for the top, where it fed straight into the light fixture instead. Now the breathing came closer, steadier, my brain supplying louder sounds and horrifying images of whatever crept towards my bed slowly from the closet side. I found the chain end finally and pulled hard, knowing I did it right that time for sure. That was when I heard the click, but the light stayed off and the dark was pressing in. Perhaps I just wanted it so bad in my panic rising fast. So I pulled it again harder, and then once again, desperate with no flood of lights banishing my fears away. Surely the chain wound too tight around the fixture to activate properly on the first try. I couldn't wait another second to find out. I was too exposed. I dove off the bed fast, lunging straight for the door handle. That was when I flung it open, letting hallway lights spill in, and I ran across the floor. I whirled around so quickly, toy sword in hand, ready to swing, but nothing stood there waiting in the gloom. That was when the room looked normal enough. A bed, dresser, bookcase with my TV and Xbox perched steadily on top waiting. No monsters hid anywhere in plain sight. I re-entered the room carefully and climbed back onto the bed steadily, with the light feeding in from the corridor, and reached up higher now with the hallway light helping me clear my mind. And then, with a loud click overhead, the light turned on, flooding the room in bright light. Once the light had re-entered the room, I told myself it had all been in my head. At least, until I looked over to the closet door, which now stood completely open, with no way to have done so by itself. I have no explanation for this, and I don't even want to try. This happened to me in the early 2010s, when I was just a toddler, no older than 4, living in a modest trailer park nestled in the northern Illinois suburbs alongside my hardworking mum, my cheating deadbeat dad, and my 4 siblings who formed our family dynamic at the time. My father spent most days sneaking around cheating on my mum, while she slaved away as the breadwinner of the family, juggling exhausting day shifts followed by grueling night work, trusting him completely to watch over us kids during her long absences, though he predictably did the exact opposite. My eldest sister was already in her early 20s back then, and is now pushing her 30s, held down her own daytime job, which left my twin sisters, Catalina and Daniela, both in their early teens at the time and early 20s now, to babysit me, the toddler, along with our other sister Valentina, who was around 10. On this particular night, my dad was out cheating somewhere as usual, my mum and eldest sister grinding through their working hours far away. Valentina and one twin off at a friend's house for the evening, and I ended up alone under the supposed care of one of the twin sisters, Daniela. She had invited several of her friends over to hang out, and their absolute favorite pastime revolved around devising increasingly cool pranks targeted specifically at gullible little me who terrified easily with my shy, scrawny frame, absorbing every tall tale about our trailer park supposedly being constructed atop of an ancient and forgotten cemetery, where residents continually reported eerie, creepy noises echoing through thin walls, as well as fleeting, shadowy figures. Everyone in the park knew these stories intimately, and they scared us kids, especially impressionable me, who jumped at every rustle or flicker, believing monsters waited in every dark corner ready to pounce without mercy. Daniela decided it would be hilarious beyond measure to prank me mercilessly by queuing up some deeply unsettling, creepy music playlist on her phone, killing every single light switch throughout our cramped shared bedroom space, and locking me inside alone with the volume cranked high enough to rattle the trailer itself. She executed the setup flawlessly, while her friends howled with laughter, egging her on, and terrified toddler me immediately dissolved into hysterical crying, begging, and pounding on the flimsy door for release, though they refused outright, and all doubled over giggling at my pathetic, desperate pleas echoing through the room. For several long minutes, stretching into what felt like eternity, the only sounds piercing the oppressive dark consisted solely of my non-stop sobbing mingled with that looping sinister music. Everything changed dramatically, however, when the phone's creepy music cut out abruptly, plunging the room into total, suffocating silence. I adjusted to the darkness enveloping around me, and suddenly, after roughly 5 minutes of that unnatural quiet, I registered a faint, ominous creak emanating directly from our bedroom closet along the small space. The groan of its door beginning to ease open inch by inch, which should have been proven utterly impossible given how ancient and broken that specific closet door truly operated in our decrepit old trailer. No child, not even a full-grown adult, could muster enough force to budge it even slightly, since it jammed stubbornly. There was no way it was a draft or any storm wind or other unnatural force, while the bedroom's lone, narrow window remained firmly shut tight and double-locked from earlier that day. I specifically recalled begging my mum earlier that afternoon to please close the closet door completely, because it had always emanated this profoundly weird, wary feeling, radiating unease whenever left ajar, so she obliged, securing it shut tightly herself, ensuring no one else entered our room before nightfall. Daniela lacked the raw strength necessary to pry it open solo, even summoning every ounce of teenage muscle she possessed, and, crucially, no other person occupied the confines of the locked bedroom. The impossible motion terrified me utterly, sending me into fresh paroxysms of fear, banging and clawing at the bedroom door, while shrieking through convulsive sobs, because something sinister lurked inside that closet and was coming for me. Daniela, knowing full well that the closet was almost impossible to open, scoffed at my pleas, thinking it was designed to scare her, or have pity on me, of which there was none. Then, without further warning, this full-blown monster materialized completely, emerging from the closet, its yawning maw stretching ceiling-level high, crowned with massive sprawling antlers. There was really no body form, but I could see its arms and legs. But the strangest part was that it was like tree branches were sprouting everywhere on and off its body, completely covering it from head to toe. And I could barely see the two tiniest dots where its face would probably be. When I saw it, my heart sank. I was petrified with fear to the point where I could barely move, and I mustered everything I could, panicking, trying to open the door, but the more I tried, the more my sibling and her friends laughed at me. I whipped my head frantically, alternating between the door's mocking wooden grain and the encroaching abomination making its way closer to me. It never truly walked, but loomed directly in my direction, inch by inch. Interminable frozen staring contest, stretching seconds into eternity. Then I squeezed my eyes shut. Then, suddenly, powerful hands yanked me backwards, violently ripping me free from paralysis, and I snapped my eyes open, discovering Daniela clutching the back of my soaked shirt, hauling me bodily through the now swinging bedroom door, having finally grown alarmed at my unnatural, complete silence, following the non-stop shrieking and pleas. She steadied me roughly as I nearly tumbled forwards from leaning so heavily against the door, immediately demanding what the hell happened to me inside to reduce me to such ghostly pallor and trembling. I babbled the entire horrific sequence. Turning on the harsh overhead light, revealed our closet door appearing deceptively completely shut, but upon closer inspection, it had actually been opened slightly. I insisted vehemently that this ajar proof validated every word, absolving me of the sin of fabrication. Yet, despite knowing deep down the closet's legendary immovability required superhuman force, she slammed emotional shutters, refusing point blank to entertain anything I'd said. For years afterwards, whenever subsequent paranormal encounters plagued me, turning me repeatedly into wide-eyed witnesses, I defaulted stubbornly to skepticism and gaslighting my senses, thanks to that formative betrayal, until finally confiding the full story to my mum many years later, when her face drained utterly. She revealed that the precise creature I described matched verbatim the nightmare apparition my other twin sister, Catalina, had tearfully confided seeing peeking menacingly through her bedroom window every single night, alongside identical stalkings emerging from her own closet, cracking open during the sleepless nights. Crucially, no one within our family had ever heard my account beforehand, since Daniela and I swore mutual secrecy, shielding her from parental wrath, and assuming no contamination or fabrication opportunities existing whatsoever, making this my mum's first exposure to my testimony. I accused her of fabrication, but she swore that Catalina described the towering antler figure, wreathed entirely in sprouting tree branches, glaring balefully through glass and closet alike, terrorizing her so much she abandoned our shared bedroom entirely, fleeing to the couch or parents' room nightly, until we vacated the cursed trailer park permanently. After which, any traces of the entity vanished. What precisely haunted our closet, targeting specifically me and Catalina with such obsessive demonic fixation? I do not know. A forest demon? A Wendigo? Skinwalker? Or some unimaginable indigenous horror, eternally tied to the land? Mum and I occasionally revisited the trailer park, as we had friends there, and our specific yellow trailer mouldered, perpetually vacant, and abandoned like a plague-stricken ruin, avoided by all neighbors, for reasons they never specified. If anyone has any insight on what I saw, and my sister, I'd love to hear it. I was 3 years old, and living with my mum in a cheap, single-wide trailer parked in a really crappy trailer park out in the middle of nowhere. That was when Mum worked 2 jobs flat out, just to keep us going, and went to cosmetology school at nights after Dad left us high and dry without looking back. So I stayed overnight with my aunts a lot during these hard days, since Mum pulled graveyard shifts, leaving her wiped out come morning light. Next, she'd pick me up from my aunt's house around 7 a.m., One day, tired from another long haul, we drove back to our trailer slowly, and I remember immediately not wanting to go inside, begging to ride my bike, but my exhausted mother just wanted to go to sleep. So inside we went, and she lay in bed. I sat up watching Barney for a while, but being the kind of toddler I was, I kept waking her up asking to go outside to ride my bike, which we usually kept in my room because if we left it outside, it would get stolen. I told my mum I didn't want to go play in my room, so I asked to lay with her. While we were laying there, for some reason I told my mum there was someone in my closet and he wanted to hurt me. I have no idea how I knew that. I don't even think I went into my room that day. She got up to show me no one was in there, and when she walked into my room, the folding closet door started to open and got stuck on something. Turns out a previously convicted child molester has skipped bail on a new trial, watched my mum's coming and going for a few days, and broken into her house while she was at work. He took my bike into the closet with him, hoping I would come looking for it when we got home. And the only thing that kept him from jumping out of the closet to attack my mum when she walked in there were the spokes on my bikes getting stuck on the little metal tabs on the bottom of these folding closet doors. Needless to say, we ran like hell out of the house, got into the car and drove away. Unfortunately, the guy got out of the house before the cops showed up. They actually caught the guy a few days later in the same trailer park trying to sell drugs to some teenagers, and it just happened to be the same cop that came to my trailer who caught him. And he admitted to breaking into some trailers. We lived in an old house. Everyone, every roommate, every guest who stayed there more than a week, eventually repeated the same rule: to not shut the closet door all the way. No one ever explained why, just that it was better if it stayed open, so out of habit, we always left it open a crack. One night though, we absent-mindedly pushed it shut without thinking. That was the night everything started. It was around 3:30 a.m. My dog was curled up across the pillow above my head, which she did sometimes when she wanted to be close. I woke up because she suddenly started letting out these distressing little cries. I reached up to touch her, but before I could get my hand to her fur, I heard a very faint rattle, like metal on wood. Still half asleep, I lay there listening, and the sound came again, a short, sharp shake of a doorknob. At first I thought it was the bedroom door, but I couldn't see it from the angle I was lying at, and the dog's soft whining had pinned me in place. I was on my left side, my back facing the closet, and slowly, very slowly, I turned onto my back. The rattling was coming from inches behind me, which was the closet door, the one we had been told not to close. The sound stopped the moment I faced upwards. My dog quieted as well. I didn't sleep much after that. But the second night is when things got truly strange. Almost exactly at the same time, 3:30 a.m., within minutes, my dog again started making those soft, dream noises in the same position, and again through that sleepy haze came the unmistakable metallic shake of a doorknob. The closet door. 2 nights in a row, 2 nights at the same time. But the second night didn't end with rattling. When I rolled onto my back bracing myself, I didn't just hear something. I saw right there in the bedroom door a human-shaped figure. He didn't glow exactly. It was more like the air around him rippled with a distortion. That's honestly the closest description that I can give. He was tall and broad, and I immediately knew who it was. It was Jack, the former owner of the house. Everyone had seen him at one point or another. My roommate once watched him float straight through the dining room, whispering the French children's song Alouette, as if he were humming to himself. Another housemate had seen a shape pass behind the mirror. Someone else heard footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway when they were home alone. But this was different. This wasn't glimpsing in passing. This wasn't a corner of the eye figure. This was face to face. I rubbed my eyes so hard I thought I'd given myself floaters, but he didn't go away. He just stood there, not moving nor fading. It took everything in me to find my voice. When I finally managed it, I whispered out, "Hi, Jack." Immediately, his form dematerialized until the room was empty again, and the closet door stayed perfectly still. Why the door rattled, why it mattered, whether it was shut or not, I never knew. None of us ever received an answer. All we knew was that every person who lived in the house always made a point to never close that door. And after that night, trust me, I never did. I grew up in a small town in Kansas called Atkinson. I learned at a very young age that the paranormal is very real, because when I was about 4 years old, my mum and stepdad rented a house on Kearney Street that came with a not-so-happy house ghost. It centered around a spare bedroom on the main floor that was attached to the dining room, specifically the closet. Since at the time I was an only child, my parents decided to turn that spare room into a playroom and threw all the toddler toys you could think of in it. One bright sunny morning, my uncle had set up a toy tunnel to play with. It was basically a bunch of plastic hoops connected by lengths of multicolor plastic fabric. You probably know the kind. At one end was him, being his usual goofy self, and at the other end were the closet doors. The first few times I wiggled through it, nothing happened. But the more times I went through, the darker the closet got, until the last time when something loud whispered my name. I remember going into the empty closet, seeing that there was nobody there, and having a meltdown. My poor uncle had no idea what the hell was happening. I was also kind of a brat. My mum was a big fan of making me stand in the corner when I misbehaved, and her favorite corner to stick me in, directly across from the playroom. I constantly heard that thing whisper my name or tell me to turn around, but I never did. I'm not entirely sure. I might have been dreaming, but one night I think I saw it. My memory goes like this. All 3 of the bedrooms were upstairs. My parents' room, my room, and my future brother's room. I had just graduated from the crib to a big boy bed, and sometimes rolled out of it onto the hardwood floor. Usually I would just crawl back into bed and go back to sleep, but this time was different. I noticed there was a faint, white, flickering glow coming from the staircase. I, being the curious child I was, went to investigate. As soon as I peeked my little face around the corner so I could see into the dining room, I saw what used to be a woman, glowing white and blue with long wispy hair and a white funeral dress blowing gently in the breeze that wasn't there, floating across the room. As soon as I saw her, I noticed her face was a skull covered in patchy, desiccated skin. She turned to look at me with eyeless sockets and started coming at me. I ran into my room and hid under my bed for the rest of the night, which thankfully passed uneventfully. I woke up the next morning to my mum pulling me out from under the bed, thinking I had rolled out again and fallen back asleep on the floor before I could get myself resituated. I looked back on it now and see that it's probably what happened, but the memory of that thing in the dining room is seared into my memory. It was so vivid that for my whole life I've been convinced it really happened. Today, the lot where the house stood is just a strange alley that leads from Kearney back to another alley at a T-section. The events I've mentioned took place in '82, and I will carry the memory of them forever, but they were only the beginning of my tale. We closed on a house about a month ago, and since then, we've completely gutted it. The only things inside are some tools, a table, a camping chair, and a refrigerator for water. The AC has been off because of renovations, and the water is shut off too. A few weeks ago, on 2 separate occasions, I heard something fall loud enough to sound like something hit the floor. Both times I went to look, and both times there was nothing out of place. My boyfriend was with me for both incidents and heard the exact same thing. Since the house is practically empty, it's pretty easy to tell when something has moved or fallen, and nothing had. My boyfriend isn't the type to jump to paranormal explanations, but yesterday he was working alone in the master closet early in the morning. He said he suddenly heard a man talking, like a full conversation, coming from the main room. He went out to check, and of course no one was there. The house is in a rural area, so random visitors or neighbors wandering by aren't likely. He locked the front door and went back to work. Today, I was working in the master closet again, while he was on the opposite side of the wall in the laundry room. I left for about 15 minutes, and while I was gone he said it sounded like someone was inside the closet working. I have one of those big job site fans set up in there, so he thought maybe it had toppled over. When he went to check, the fan was upright and nothing else in the room could have made the noise he heard. He said he finally spoke out loud, "If you're gonna be in here, you might as well help or pay rent." And after that everything went completely silent. Something similar happened to me last week when I was alone. I was sitting near the center of the house when I heard scratching coming from the master bedroom/bathroom area. Since we live in a rural area, my first thought was raccoons or rats. I walked into the bedroom and hit the wall that leads to my closet, hoping to scare off whatever was there. As soon as my hand hit the wall, almost like it was responding, a loud bang came from the kitchen. It wasn't delayed, but immediate, like something answered back. I went into the kitchen thinking maybe I had knocked something over, but there's nothing in there except a ladder, and that was still in place. There aren't even cabinets or a sink anymore, just the concrete floor and the open plumbing cutout. It leaves you feeling a little crazy, hearing noises you can't explain in a house that's practically empty. I'm not saying it's a ghost, but every normal explanation feels like it's already been ruled out, with no running water, no AC system making noise, no pets, no pests we could find. The house is 25 years old and built of concrete. So now I'm wondering, is there anything I'm overlooking? What could possibly be causing this? The first house I lived in was extremely haunted. And this is from my mum and sister, as I was only 2 when this was happening. So I would wake up at night and stare at the closet and immediately start crying, but only when it was open. However, when my mum would shut it completely around 4 a.m, I would wake up and start crying. When my mum would wake up, the closet would be wide open. From that same closet, my sister, who was 12 at the time, went to get something from the closet for my mum and saw the shadow of someone swinging from a rope in the back of the closet. My memory of that closet was when I was around 5, my sister was babysitting me, and I was in my mum's room watching TV. I heard a noise coming from the closet and thought it was my sister trying to prank me, so I hid to scare her when she came out. My poor little 5-year-old brain was not ready to see what truly stayed in that closet. I saw the door creep open, and it was pitch black in there. These long, bony fingers, darker than the closet, reached out to open the door more, and this tall, black mass slowly started to escape it. Mind you, I'm hiding in a pile of blankets 6 to 7 feet from the door, and the only way out of this room is right where this thing is, so I sit there pale as a ghost, watching this thing attempt to get into the hallway. I begin to cry, terrified that if I make a noise, this thing will attack me. Around that time, I heard my sister coming to check on me, and at that moment, I had to warn her, so I screamed at the top of my lungs to get away from her, and it flew back into the closet and slammed the closet with such force, the neighbor thought a car hit the apartment building. This was a few years ago. I purchased my childhood home with my husband. The first couple of years, we had a toxic roommate who would pit us against each other. Over time, he ended up staying in his room all the time, falling into depression. He found a boyfriend and moved out, and I wasted no time in turning the spare room into guest quarters. I started having horrible insomnia, so to allow my husband to sleep undisturbed, I moved into the guest room, and this is where things got dark. I finally found a healthy sleeping pattern that worked for me and was getting real sleep. And that's when the nightmares started. A clown was in the closet, but not just any clown, a demonic, evil, twisted clown. Bear in mind, I'm not afraid of clowns in the slightest. He kept telling me that I was to be his bride, and that I needed to kill everyone I loved in order to bring him fully into this world. And in my nightmares, I would plan with him and agree. But I would wake up with the closet door, which had been closed and latched, with an old-school hook-and-eye latch, wide open, and everything in it disheveled. I feared the ex-roommate's depression had opened a doorway for darkness to enter, as he was in a vulnerable state when he occupied the room. After weeks and weeks of those nightmares, every night, I decided to cleanse the house. I opened the front door and burned sage. My husband and I both have indigenous ancestry, so the burning of sage is a cleanse our ancestors held sacred. I started in the attic, making certain the smoke touched even the darkest corners and cleansed room by room. When I began in the spare room, the light bulb exploded, the doorknobs rattled. I didn't stop. I pushed until I felt the energy leave the house. My husband, who was outside with our dog, knew when it was over. I never said a word because he saw the darkness shoot out the front door. We've had no issues since. The nightmare stopped immediately, the closet door remains closed and latched, but I'll never forget the hopelessness and darkness I felt in those dreams, or why I saw it as a clown. Years ago, I rented a small apartment during one of the hardest periods of my life. The place wasn't bad at first glance, tiny but clean enough. It had this narrow hallway that ended at the kitchen, and right there was a pantry closet with one of those motion-activated lights. The closet would end up being the center of some of the strangest experiences I have ever had. The first thing that happened wasn't the closet though. One night our dog startled me and my partner awake. He was normally calm, and definitely not the kind of pup to bark without any reason. But that night he went absolutely wild. He leapt off the bed, stood at the foot of it, and barked and snarled at what looked to us to be empty air. His entire body was tense. We tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop staring and growling at that exact same spot, right at the end of our bed, until finally he just collapsed in exhaustion. A few nights later, the closet started acting up. It was about 2 a.m., dead quiet in the apartment, when suddenly the light inside the pantry flicked on. The door was shut, no one was near it, and the motion sensor only triggered if something physically moved inside. I remember just lying there frozen, staring down the hallway. The glow from the closet spilled out through the cracks in the door, faint but enough to make the shadows in the kitchen dance. I got up, heart pounding, and forced myself to check. When I opened the door, the pantry was completely empty. The shelves were bare, nothing inside had shifted or fallen, and I shut the door, went back to bed, and tried to convince myself it was just a faulty sensor. But it didn't stop there. For weeks afterwards, the light would flicker on at random, always between 1 and 3 a.m. Sometimes it would stay on for a long time, other times it would switch off almost immediately. I started dreading that soft click in the dead of night, that faint glow seeping under the door. Once I swear I saw a shadow move across the crack of light, as though something inside shifted when I wasn't looking. It got to the point where I avoided walking past it at night. I'd find myself holding my breath, like if I make a sound, whatever was inside would hear me. I've heard theories about things like this, spirits that drift through, shadows from other places bleeding into ours. I don't know what to believe, but to this day I can still picture the closet door glowing faintly in the dark, and that feeling, like something was just standing on the other side, waiting. A little context at first. My stepmom and I, back then, did not get along very well. That was when my dad divorced her eventually and had a different woman move in with us while we stayed put, getting along great with her right from the start. It was the summer before 8th grade, when the three of us, Dad's first stepmom and I, settled into this 3-bedroom house that looked pretty nice overall from the outside. My best friend and I got really excited about it, since my room became bigger than before with more things to do inside now that I was more spread out. Now, in the corner of the hallway right where my parents' door sat, was always very dark, abnormally dark, and eerie, pressing in heavy. I had to walk past it every time to reach my room or head back to the kitchen. So within the first week of living there, I started hearing scratches in the walls between my room and the office, faint and consistent night after night. Anytime I stayed in the living room, something thudded loud nearby. Now, having 2 cats around meant I wasn't so unnerved by this, since they knocked things over playing or jumping high onto shelves often enough. I often ignored those sounds, brushing them off as just feline movement, and wouldn't bat an eye. Well, one night I came home from a school dance, carrying a bright star balloon, and gave it to my stepmom for no reason, just feeling nice. That was when she told me to put it in her room simply, so I carried it down the hall. Next, I tucked it into her closet since both parents had separate ones built in deep. And the 2 of us forgot about it completely after that moment passed. 2 weeks later, she got home from work before I returned from school that afternoon, tired. That was when I walked in, and she confronted me, asking if I'd left the balloon in the hallway in plain sight. So me being confused, with no memory of any balloon at first, I walked into the hallway to check for myself. And there sat the silver balloon, fully inflated in the center of the hallway, still floating. I racked my memory and told her that it came from the school dance weeks ago. And that was when we both knew it was very unlikely, since it had to have passed through 2 closed doors in our AC, and it was too weak to push anything like that around. But we both agreed that it was simple enough, and forgot about the oddity pushing ahead like normal. Cut to a few months later, when my stepmom came up to me suddenly explaining what had just happened in her room alone. That she had just sat there and was doing her makeup when out of the corner of her eye where the closet stood, she thought she saw me lurking there quietly. She said she was not in the mood for messing around right then and turned around quickly to face where I stood. But no one waited there in the empty space staring back at her. So she tried laughing it off as a weird trick of the light. That was when things stayed calm without much stirring up, until after she moved out, and the new stepmom settling in, replacing her. Noises started back up. Faint scratchings and thuds returned like before. I thought nothing of it, since now 2 dogs joined our 2 cats, making double the odd bumps and paw paddings around the house. Mum and I talked about ghosts one evening casually, sharing how she saw them clearly sometimes from past places. That was when, after stories of previous haunted houses, did she drop the bomb about a little girl hiding in her closet watching. So she sometimes moved from parents' rooms to the office or just outside the hallway corner peering out shyly. Mum and Dad advised her never to seek out a spirit since they craved validity, staying real once acknowledged. She told me that the girl was afraid of women but loved my father, and that the girl would just stare at my mum from her corner. I, being a horror movie nerd but skeptic, decided to heed her warning and not do anything and just ignore all the weird. A few months into my mum moving in, she comes into my room late at night. She's shaking and saying that something is wrong with my dad, and she thinks only I can help. I walk in. My dad is just staring at the closet while breathing heavy and crying. And for those obviously unaware, my dad is a very tall and rough man who never cries or shows his fear, so seeing this is immediately alarming. I rush to his side and start calling his name. He doesn't respond and just stares at the closet. I try asking my mum what happened, and she just said that he was trying to sleep, but woke up and started doing this. I wanted to try and get him up and get him out the room. Once he sat on the couch in the living room, he started coming to and asking why he was there and what had happened. He insisted he go back to bed despite our protests. The cycle of him going to bed, then start gasping and crying, then coming into the living room continued till we brought him to the porch outside, where he said he felt clearer, but that it also felt like someone was hugging him like a child. He said he felt the little girl's sadness and that she was calling to him. He again went back into the room and started the cycle, but when he came into the living room, he started getting violent, demanding to go into the room and that she needed him. That she was crying for him. My mother blocked the door into the hallway with a Bible and cross in hand and said he wouldn't pass. My father then said that he would get into that room sooner or later. This was way out of my dad's personality. Anytime my mother would come near him with the Bible and cross, he would tell her to get away, that he didn't want her near him, that he needed to go into the room because that was his room. Eventually he made a deal with us, that if he could talk to the girl, that he would do what we wanted, that all he needed was to talk to her. We begrudgingly let him, and we were told to stay in the living room. And after 5 minutes he came back out completely fine. When we inquired as to what happened and what they talked about, my dad said he promised the girl he wouldn't share it, but he told us what had happened before. He said the little girl's mother was just angry and hateful. This scared my mum and I. We just wanted this to all be over. It was 3 AM at this point, and we were exhausted. When my parents went into their room, nothing else happened. I finally fell asleep after much tossing and turning, and in the morning my father didn't have much memory of anything, mainly just being on the couch and on the porch. I used to have videos, but they got erased. My parents don't really speak about that now. One more big thing happened after that night. So for a bit more context, my father and I used to make it a tradition to go down to a resale shop at our last house and buy these porcelain dolls. They were very beautiful, and we never had any problems with them before. Neither of my stepmoms were fan of the dolls because they thought they were creepy. So because I didn't have any space in my room, I had to put them in my closet. They all stood up and were very stable, having a stand wired to their backs. These dolls weren't moving and had stayed in that position for months. So I was in my room, settling down for the night. A few minutes after I had turned off my light and was relaxing, I heard a loud thud from my closet. My mind is racing because I don't know what possibly could have made that noise. My brain tried to reason that maybe one of the cats was in the closet and they wanted out, or that maybe something just broke. I then worked the nerve to get out of bed and find out what it was. I could hear my heart in my ears racing and booming. It felt like 10 minutes just standing outside my closet, trying to build up my nerve to open the door. I turned the knob and reopened it, my eyes scanning the darkness. I decided to walk in and find the drawstring, and when I came face to face with my doll, strung up by her hair on a hanger, my scream caught in my throat, and my heart nearly stopped. How the hell is she like that? My dolls hadn't moved in months, and have never fallen down like that. It was impossible for her to have fell from where she was originally placed and land on the hanger below. All my dolls were crammed together, but none of them had moved as much as an inch. The only way she could have fallen without disturbing the other dolls was to fall forward, but she fell at an angle of about 60 degrees. Just no way. I called my dad. He laughed at me and called me a weenie, but he did put my dolls in the attic and went to bed. The only minor thing that happened after that was like seeing someone walk across the doorway in the bedroom, but no one was there. The dogs were going nuts for no reason. We've since moved, but I still get chills when thinking about stepping foot in that house. I know this sounds far-fetched, but it feels good to tell someone. I feel bad for the people who next move into that house, because that little girl's their problem now. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'm going to be trialing cutting the intros for a little while. If you really want to know why, well, it's because YouTube is really giving me a hard time with spreading the joy of the horror stories out into the wider internet, and I feel that maybe just cutting it might help keep some retention in, so that's what I'm going to be trying. Just bear that in mind. Probably a few more visuals as well. Gonna give that a go, see how people respond. It's been a while since people have complained. I've added them in sparingly. So because no one's actually said anything, I think I might try it again, because I think, you know, like a visual thing looks a bit better than just black screen, and that also could help encourage new listeners. So, you know, I'm going to be trying some stuff basically, and I hope that it is to your liking. Of course, if there are complaints, feedback, etc., I would appreciate hearing it too, because I would really like to see some more growth, because my growth, guys, is literally like it's crazy. It's like 200 subs a month, which, you know, is really small. It's the smallest it's ever been. Like, when I started, obviously it was tiny, but you know, when I got the ball rolling, it, you know, started to really grow, and you know, now it's really seemed to just kind of shrink. I know that the problem is because everyone is like putting all their attention into, you know, YouTube Shorts and TikToks and Reels and stuff. So it's to be expected, but still, I need to try and win back some new audience. So I hope you guys will help me out on this endeavor with, you know, your support and stuff. But now that the whole service announcement is out the way, I will be back hopefully tomorrow with another video. Might be changing up the schedule a bit too, to try and see if I can, you know, more videos to entice more people to listen. I don't know, we're going to be trying some cool stuff. I might even just like post a picture of what the schedule might look like once I organize it after I finish editing. Once I finish editing this, gosh, tongue-tied today. Alright then guys, I'm going to wrap things up. Final thanks to my members and patrons whose names have been rolling in the credits. If you'd like some cool perks and stuff, you can follow the links to find out more. But that's it from me. Oh, and if you have your birthday in the next month, please, you know, get it to me quickly, because I'm going to be trying to get my videos done in advance with the new stuff I'm trying. So I would appreciate knowing your birthday if you're a member or patron, just so that I can do that. Alright, cool. Cheers guys, bye!
Mortis Media.
So many things happened over the years. At first, I just thought it was the place we lived, until we moved, and the paranormal followed us. I was born in London around the mid-80s. Growing up, my mum was very spiritual. She would read tarot and runes, and we lived in a small maisonette on a council housing estate that was built sometime in the mid-70s. Odd things would always happen. Toys being moved, strange noises, even to the extent of what some would call a mimic. At my young age, I didn't know that an imaginary friend was only seen by the one person who created it in their mind. For as long as I can remember, I had always seen a young boy with dark hair, blue eyes and pale skin, dressed in a cowboy outfit, playing along the landing, although there were no boys in our block other than my big brother. I had always thought it was perhaps a kid from another block, but I never recognized him as someone from our school. It was in the early 90s, and most people left their doors open during the day or at least unlocked. I remember coming downstairs and seeing the young boy in my hallway. He looked at me with a blank expression and walked off. He never said a single word to me ever. I remember my mum would have hushed conversations with her friends about my sister and her imaginary friend. She seemed worried that my sister, who is 5 years older than me, still had what she saw as a childish imagination. She'd been getting into some serious trouble, which wasn't like her, and was blaming her imaginary friend. One evening, I was on my way to the toilet when I heard my sister talking in the bathroom. The bathroom had one of those sliding doors with a hook lock that never seems to close all the way. I was confused and peeked through the slither in the door. There, knelt on the floor leaning into the bath, was my sister, and sat in the bath was the young lad. I stared at him frozen. She was talking to him like having a full two-way conversation, but he was saying nothing. That night as we were laying in bed, I asked my sister about the boy. She was shocked. She couldn't believe I could see the cowboy. I don't know how long this kid stayed with her. I didn't dare ask. He creeped me out. But years later, after we had all moved away, I was sat in her kitchen with her as she asked her son why he had done something. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it had concerned us both. Her young son looked her dead in the face, shrugged his shoulders, and told us, "Cowboy told me to do it." Now on to the next story. It was coming up to Christmas of 1996. My mom was fiddling with a cassette player, my stepdad was at work, my brother and one of my sisters were at my friends' houses, and we had some neighbors over. My sister had gone upstairs to use the toilet, but about 30 seconds after she left the room, I heard my mum say, "Well, that was quick, you didn't flush?" We had all turned to the doorway to see my sister standing there smiling at us. Then we heard the flush from upstairs. She just faded, for lack of a better word. A moment later, my sister walks back down the room confused as to why my mum is staring at her. Now I have to say this. My sister is the spitting image of my mum's mum who passed away in 1987. We moved in 1997. As I said before, my mum would read runes and tarot cards. It was a frequent thing for her cards to be blown off the table. She would also have a blue velvet reading mat. Once, she had left her cards set up and gone to answer the door. I happened to be in the room. No one else touched her cards or even the table. When she returned and started to turn the cards face up, underneath was a pile of skin flakes. We had cup hooks on the underside of a cupboard that was above a serving hatch. My mum had her teacups hanging from it, and one day, those cups literally exploded one by one with no explanation. Also, for as long as I can remember, I've always been able to see things not everyone could. I have also known things I shouldn't know. For example, August 1997. I'm 11 years old and I shared a room with one of my sisters. We both had been in bed and asleep for a few hours when I woke up from a dream in a panic. Now I don't know why I was panicking, but I almost fell out of my bed and hurried to wake up my sister and told her that Princess Diana was dying. My sister, annoyed at me for waking her up and telling me to go back to bed and that it was just a dream. But I insisted. I was in tears. She came downstairs with me to prove her point. She turned on the news channel, and it didn't take long before it flashed up on the screen and everything was overtaken with the breaking news about the accident. This freaked my sister out so badly that while we sat there glued to the TV, she went to wake up my mum and stepdad. A few months later, my mum took me to this spiritualist church where they had mediums and Reiki healers. After the mediums had finished, one of the Reiki healers waved us over. She said she was drawn to me. She sat me down and started a healing session, and we both felt what I can only describe as static around us. When she came and knelt in front of me and asked how long I had been a spiritual bridge, she said my energy told her that the paranormal is drawn to me, like it feeds off my energy in order to make its way over to us. She told me I should wear obsidian for my own protection. I didn't for many years, but have done so for the past 20. The night before 9/11, I was staying with my eldest sister, and she says I woke up to ask her why someone would fly a plane into the building. I don't remember doing this, but she told me about it the next day. I had no idea what the Twin Towers were, let alone where they were, and when the news broke, she dropped her coffee on the floor and stared open-mouthed at me. I lived with my dad for a little while, over a year when I was a teenager. We had a very sweet dog and lived in an old 2-bed house in a small rural town. The house itself always made me uneasy. I never liked to be alone there. Well, one night when my dad was at work, I sat in the dining room on the computer, talking to my friends in the States on Yahoo Chat. My dog was curled up beside me. Where I sat, my back was to the door. I never felt comfortable leaving the door open when I was at the computer. It must have been around 1 a.m. when my dog whimpered, and her ears perked up. I looked at her and felt a sense of dread. I remember I placed my hand on the top of her head for comfort, and was just about to say something to her when a huge bang made me jump from my seat. The dog darted towards the door, all hairs standing on end. A deep growl coming from her, which was something I'd never heard her do before. Then another. It was coming from above us in my room. I stood there in fear, my dog between me and the door. I heard loud footsteps running down the stairs. They were so hard that my dad's ornamental guns fell off the wall that blocked the stairs. They stopped at the door. My dog starts to back away in fear, and the door begins to shake violently. It felt like forever, but was probably only 10 seconds or so of shaking before the door bursts open so violently that one of the wood panels cracked. There was no one there. I was just frozen in fear, with my dog now cowering at my feet, growling. After a moment, I regained control of my limbs and checked the hall. No one. I was and had been alone all this time. This isn't a webcam, and scared my friends as much as it did me. Now, I don't always hear or see things. It's getting rarer the older I get, but I can always sense when there's something around. My friend has a childlike spirit in her house. He doesn't like her Hoover. When I told her this, she laughed and responded with, "Yeah, I know. Apparently it will turn itself off when she's using it." Maybe 14 years ago now, I woke up in the middle of the night to see a very elderly Indian man dressed in traditional Southern Indian clothing, standing next to my bed, staring at my sleeping husband. I didn't feel fear or apprehension, more akin to a wave of warmth and love. I had no idea who he was, but mentioned it to my husband that he had a visit during the night. He was skeptical, so I didn't go into detail. The following January, we went to India to visit my husband's family. There was a photo on a shelf, wearing the same clothes. I come to discover it was my husband's late grandfather. So those are the events of my life. Am I haunted? Or am I just what the Reiki healer said I am? I guess it's down to you to decide. Last night we checked into the Sterling Villas in Uluwatu, which happens to be next door to the abandoned Wyndham Dreamland Resort, for a one-night stay. During the day everything was fine. We went out early into the evening around 7 p.m. and returned at around 9 p.m. Before we went out, we made sure to leave the air conditioning on in our room, which is a separate building to the living room/kitchen area, so that it would be nice and cool when we got back. Here's a brief summary of some things that happened when we returned. We noticed the air conditioning had switched off. I guess it's not the most unusual thing to happen, so we switched the aircon back on and then went into the pool. When we got out of the pool and returned to the room, it was off again. About half an hour later, I went back into the room to turn it off and get my water bottle in order to make tea. And while I was making tea in the living room, which is a completely separate unit to the bedroom, I noticed from the reflection in the mirror that the TV in our room was on. I asked my friend if she'd switched it on and she said no. Maybe it was a ghost. As soon as she said that, the TV switched off by itself. We were a bit freaked out at this point. My friend told me that she thought she'd seen an all-black figure walk across the window where the pool and table are in the mirror's reflection while she'd been getting ready for us to go out earlier in the evening. At first she thought it was me, but I of course wasn't dressed in black, but she just didn't want to freak me out. We decided to try and not overthink it, and so we went to bed. I had left my cup and the teaspoon on the table outside my bedroom by the pool. I left the teaspoon on top of the empty paper creamer packet so that it didn't drip on the table as it had been in my tea. When we were in bed, we heard a noise that sounded like the teaspoon being put down on the marble table. Not a sound like it had been dropped, but just put down with a reasonable amount of force. We were very freaked out by that point. I decided to try and Google some of the hotel reviews and found the following, which I think you might appreciate. These villas look good from the photos, but the service and staff are not great. Apart from that, all 5 of us experienced supernatural activities. Then found out there are 2 large abandoned hotels next to us. After asking locals, they confirmed that the abandoned villas at Wyndham Hotel next door are haunted, and you can see figures of light at night, even though the electricity has been disconnected. We didn't take it seriously at first and laughed about it, but even our 3-year-old child walked out of his room in the middle of the night and explained how the chair was moving in his bedroom by itself, and he saw a ball of rainbow lights floating in his room. It sounds strange writing such a review on Google, but beware. The doors open by themselves, TVs don't work and randomly turn on by themselves in the middle of the night. Black clouds appear in the middle of the bedroom. Even ChatGPT started talking on our phone, saying it could see a little boy standing next to us. Later, it said it was not able to see things through the phone, and it must be a random glitch. We heard random loud screams in the middle of the night, so loud it sounded like someone being murdered, and footsteps going up and down your villa at 3 a.m. when you know everyone is asleep. These beings are interactive. According to the locals, the spirits of the mountain are angry and feel disrespected by the tourists and construction. There were a few members in our family who didn't believe in the energies, but were convinced that these events were supernatural. We had to check out halfway, as it was getting to be too much. Beware, and read about the haunted hotel in Uluwatu on Google, which is next door before you book here. Apart from that, the rooms are smelly and the service is poor. There is a construction happening next door, and we didn't get bath towels for 3 days after entering the hotel. All in all, we decided we were too scared to stay there, and we packed our stuff to leave. I remembered I'd left a couple of things on the table where the spoon was, and so I went to grab them before we ran out the door. As I approached the table, I noticed that the spoon was still on the table, but the creamer packet that the spoon was on top of earlier was on the floor, across from the table. We left and went back to Kengu for our homestay. I know this sounds quite minor, but after we read the reviews, we knew we couldn't stay there as we were too freaked out. The weird thing is that aside from the review I found, we can't find anything else online about it, so I'm really intrigued as to whether anyone knows or has heard about this location or surrounding abandoned hotels, or any perspectives from visitors in Bali and Indonesian or Balinese locals. I was in my old church in Connecticut, changing some light fixtures in an upstairs hallway. The Boy Scout troop who uses this space at night had reported footsteps before, but I thought nothing of it. I had a 6-foot ladder out with the new fixture on the paint step and 2 new 3-inch screws on the top step. As I reached up to take the bowl off the old fixture, I felt a poke in my chest, then heard a ding ding ding. I looked down, and one of the screws was on the top step, and the other was now rolling around in the new fixture below. I did not shake the ladder. I told it to scram and that I was busy. I've had encounters before, but not here, and I changed the fixture without further issue. I moved to the room next door and kept the lights off so that I could change some fluorescent tubes. While in the first fixture, the light adjacent flashed on and off 3 to 4 times. I did 2 more fixtures, and each time a nearby fixture would flash. I finally said, "Knock it off," and got out of there. A friend with abilities came through a few months later and made the comment that there was an angry man up there who doesn't want anyone in his space. Apparently this phantom had tried to scare me off. I work in a museum and also give guided tours in a nearby medieval prison in my town. It was built in 1524, and executions and torture took place there, so it has seen a lot of history and suffering over the centuries. The building itself is incredibly haunted, or at least it feels that way most days. We hear creaks coming from the floor, windows, and doors all the time, even when there is no wind and no one else in the building. Sometimes it sounds like footsteps, shifting just out of sight. There are also certain spots where the energy just feels off, like walking into a cold pocket of air. Most of us who work there have gotten used to it, but we still talk about it sometimes, especially after something unusual happens. You learn to just brush it off a lot of the time, but every now and then something happens that's harder to explain away. So there was this one time when I was standing alone in the middle of what we call the main cell area. It's a large open space with several old cells lining the walls, and the acoustics in there make even the smallest sound echo slightly. It was completely silent at the time, which made the whole place feel even more isolated. I remember checking the time and wondering where the group was, since they were a little late, and after a minute or 2 I turned around to see if they had maybe come in without me noticing, and that's when I saw it. Right near the doorway, just at the edge of my vision as I turned, a shadow figure passed by. It wasn't vague or shapeless. It had a clear human outline like a person walking quickly across the entrance. The movement was fast and smooth, almost like someone in a hurry trying not to be noticed. It crossed the doorway in less than a second, and then it was just gone. I stood there for a moment, staring at the doorway, trying to process what I'd seen. I half expected someone to step back into view, or for the door to move, but everything stayed completely still. What surprised me the most was my reaction, though. I always thought if I ever experienced something like that, I'd be completely terrified, like heart racing, ready to run out the building. But I wasn't. I didn't feel scared at all. If anything, I was just kind of stunned and fascinated, like my brain was trying to catch up with what had just happened. I stayed there for another minute or so, just replaying it in my head, making sure I hadn't imagined it or misinterpreted a shadow from the outside. But the shape had been too clear, too defined. Eventually, I heard voices approaching from the entrance, and the tour group finally arrived. I shook it off, greeted them like normal, and went right back into my usual routine, explaining the history, pointing out the cells, talking about the executions and the stories tied to the place. The whole time, though, that moment stayed in the back of my mind. It didn't ruin the day or make me want to leave, but it definitely changed how I looked at that space. Since then, I have been a lot more aware when I'm in that area alone. Nothing that clear has happened to me again personally, but I am now more wary in case something else happens to me out there. I have never been a believer in ghosts or anything paranormal in nature for that matter. But this is something that isn't sitting right with me. When my mum told me the story of what happened and sent me the picture of what she saw, my heart honestly skipped a beat, and I have been unwell. So, my mum works in this hotel/restaurant up in Wisconsin. I live in Georgia. The restaurant is closed on Sundays and Mondays, and she was covering for someone on the hotel side until 11:30 p.m. She was cleaning and going in and out of the restaurant because that's where the coffee is, and she replaces the coffee every few hours, so the lights were still on. Well, she was just watching the cameras because she was expecting 2 check-ins, when all of a sudden something caught her eye from inside the restaurant. She immediately calls the guy that was going to be working starting at 11:30 to see if he could come right away, and was going to lock herself in the office, because apparently it shook her to her core. The guy came 4 minutes later, I guess because my mum was going to have a heart attack. This figure was still there, and even the guy saw it on the camera, so when they went into the restaurant, nothing was there. They looked everywhere, and when they went back to look at the camera, the figure was gone. I still feel bad for my mum. I don't know what it could be, but whatever it is, looks creepy as hell. Almost 20 years ago, I had a physical encounter with a ghost. This occurred at the old Spokane, Washington steam plant, now a restaurant, the steam plant and grill, with a mini shopping area near the street. Back in the day, before modern heating systems, the steam plant provided heat and climate control to our old hospital. Think how Russia still heats their apartments in the city even today. When it closed, it was abandoned, but later it was declared a historic landmark and was revitalized with much old equipment kept intact. You can eat at the restaurant and tour around looking at the equipment used at the time, even go into one of the old cooling towers. Around 2005, my mum had a shop there for a bit. I was going to the local college after a summer in the Forest Service and was wearing a heavy jacket I earned helping with a fire. The thick collar was always crooked, and it drove my mum nuts. Personally, I felt like a rebellious young lady and let it be. Bring a good and proper young lady. While I struggled socially due to mild autism, my brain is good at picking up specific details, bits of odd info, and when I was younger, I was obsessed with ghosts, UFOs, and cryptic things in general. That and disasters and forensics. I wanted to see a ghost, see Bigfoot, and meet an alien. As I got older, I got more into the sciences and more logical, but a tiny bit of me still loved those topics. Anyway, that day I was helping my mum in her shop when I asked for a break to stretch my legs, plus I wanted to look around the historical markers and use them to help me talk to customers about the building's history. Usually nothing strange happened, except twice the restaurant accountant literally fled to my mum's shop, absolutely terrified because she claimed the ghost had touched her shoulder like it was looking over her shoulder as she worked on the computer. Mum usually gave her coffee to calm her nerves, and she refused to go back to work until her husband got there. Usually Mum just rolled her eyes and chuckled in private. She was terrified. Anyway, as I left, my mum once again nagged me more about my crooked coat collar. I rolled my eyes and left, but apparently something agreed with my mum that day. As on the second floor, I was reading a few displays when suddenly I could feel a hand grabbed the left side of my jacket collar, lift my whole winter coat up a few inches off my shoulder, and then set it back down like a very old, annoyed person, resulting in a near-perfect collar. Now, I have been pranked as a kid multiple times. I knew how to do a fast 360 spin on my heels. Immediately I spun around, and to my shock, there was no one near me. The closest person was about 40 feet away, calmly reading her own display. I immediately shouted out at her, confused, "Hey, did you just straighten my collar or see who did?" She looked at me bewildered. I then told her what happened, and she told me bluntly, "No, I was nowhere near you. Only you and we were up here." Her face suddenly grew pale, and she started stuttering, saying she had to go anyway. Her reaction confused me, until the memory of this poor restaurant accountant popped into my head. I too decided it was time to leave, and my mild autism kicked in hard. I had to report this to the authorities immediately. Flying down the stairs, it was clear that the police could not do anything. Spokane has no Ghostbusters, so I needed to report this to restaurant management. So I bolted to the restaurant and told the greeter up front that I had to talk to the manager now. Apparently, my look of fright convinced her to do exactly that. When he came out, he said he was rather busy, but asked what I needed, and I immediately told him what had transpired moments ago. The guy literally smiled, laughed, and then said, "Congratulations, you've just met the ghost." Seeing my confusion about his levity, he explained that apparently some think one old employee who worked here when it was still a steam plant never actually left after passing away. He was a benign spirit, never harming a soul, but he had this curiosity about new technology. Many employees and customers reported feeling a hand or presence on their shoulder, as if someone was looking over and asking, "What are you doing?" The same thing happened when working on desktop computers. Other people would see a human-shaped shadow moved along the surface or wall, but there'd never be a human body to go with it. Nothing bad ever happened. The ghost was just curious. While I processed this like a slow computer doing AOL dial-up, he patted me on the shoulder, thanked me for telling him what happened, but that he had to get back to the kitchen. But pausing, he admitted a heavy coat collar being fixed was a new one for the ghost before leaving. Still in an adrenaline state of shock, I went back to my mum's shop and told her what had happened. I expected to be mocked, but my religious mum admitted recently she sensed she had been watched once or twice. A recently installed picture by a new artist was creeping her out, since she swore she saw its eyes move a few times. At that point, I decided to quote the restaurant manager and told her, "Don't worry, the ghost has never harmed a living soul." Nothing ever happened after that. But a few weeks after, I was thrilled about my ghost experience. It was a relatively benign thing, considering most stories are usually scary and physically dangerous. As I worked at a castle hotel a few years ago, I was the unlucky fool who had 1 month of night shifts. The hotel was empty because of COVID. Only me and the janitor were there to look after the hotel. We had plenty of good and expensive rum, gin and whiskey, and other things people could steal, so we watched the hotel at night, and everyone who worked there was sure we had at least one ghost in the hotel. Well, one night at around 2 or 3, we sat in the office and just talked, or just sat there in silence, nothing special. Boring night shift. But not this night. We had the theory of the ghost, and as we sat there we heard footsteps on the 2nd floor. The floor was made of wood, so you could clearly hear when someone walked over it. Especially because it was so quiet, and both of us looked confused. As we went upstairs looking for the source of the footsteps, as we had to be sure no one had gotten inside to steal something, we found nothing. No open windows, no broken doors, or anything else. Every room was still closed, but we could clearly hear those footsteps. Even our boss looked at the security videos the next day but found nothing. We even heard them a few more times but never found anyone walking through the hotel. It was honestly the strangest thing. I managed an old historic boutique motel on the coast that was built in the late 1800s, and over the years it had passed through generations of the same family. Not long after I started, I met the great-great-grandson of the original owner. He came by occasionally and would sit with me, telling stories about the property. Some of the things he shared stuck with me more than I expected. He talked about a hidden tunnel somewhere on the grounds, used back in the early days for reasons he never fully explained. He also mentioned the number of deaths that had happened there over the years, guests, accidents, illness, things that just sort of piled up with a place that old. But the story that stayed with me the most was about a bride who had fallen out one of the upstairs windows on her wedding day. He didn't dramatize it, didn't try to make it sound scary, he just stated the facts. When I first started managing the place, my apartment on site was still being renovated, so they put me up in one of the upstairs suites temporarily. It was a beautiful room, but it had this large walk-in closet that always felt a little off. Inside the closet was a small old wooden door that led up to the attic. It looked like something out of a different era. Well, out of curiosity, we tried opening it a few times during the day, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it had been sealed shut for years. Well, one night everything changed. I was in the room with my daughter, and my dog was lying near the foot of the bed. Out of nowhere, she started growling low and deep. Her fur stood straight up along her back, and she was locked onto the closet staring. That alone was enough to wake my daughter. We both just sat there for a moment listening to the growl, trying to figure out what she was reacting to. But there was nothing else, no sound or movement, just the dog staring and growling at the closet door. We started arguing quietly about who was going to go check it out. Neither of us wanted to be the one to open it, but neither of us wanted to ignore it either. And then we didn't have a choice. That small attic door, one we hadn't been able to open at all before, suddenly flew open. It just snapped open with force. My dog completely lost it. She went from growling to full panic, scrambling towards the door out of the room, trying to get out. I don't think I've ever seen her get that scared before or since. My daughter started crying, and honestly I wasn't far behind. Whatever confidence I had about handling weird situations disappeared instantly. We didn't investigate, we didn't try and explain it, we simply left. And the next day we moved rooms. And from that point on, my dog refused to go upstairs in the building at all. You could try to lead her, call her, anything you wanted, but she would stop at the bottom and not go any higher. I worked there for years after that, and thankfully that was the only strange thing that happened. We had a security camera set up in the lobby, and the monitor for it was in my apartment. The lobby itself was set up like a cozy common area with couches, a big table where guests could sit and do puzzles or play games, and on that table was a handmade checkerboard crafted out of leather with large, heavy checker pieces. At night, after the lobby was closed and completely empty, I would sometimes hear the sounds of pieces being moved, like someone was actually playing a game. More than once I checked the camera when I heard it, and every time the lobby would be empty. There were plenty of other little things over the years too. Unexplained noises, things slightly out of place that constantly felt like you weren't completely alone. But the one thing I can't explain is the bride. It didn't happen often. A figure near the window, the one she supposedly fell from. You'd catch it out of the corner of your eye sometimes, if you looked directly. She'd still be there, but only for a moment. Working there, you learn to function around things you can't explain. But there's always that underlying weirdness. I'm glad I no longer work there. My family moved into a massive old house when I was 10. A cousin of mine was supposed to help us move in. He'd always been kind of eccentric, but nothing alarming. The honestly strange part was how he behaved the moment we arrived. He stood in the doorway for maybe 10 seconds just staring into the empty hall. Then he muttered something about forgetting he had other plans and just left. After that, he avoided the house completely. Be it birthday, holiday, family dinners, he never came, and we always teased him about it, and we joked that he must have seen a ghost. Somehow the imaginary ghost ended up with a name, Daniel. The joke stuck. If something went missing, we always said Daniel took it. A door creaked at night, it was Daniel. It was just dumb, harmless fun. That is, of course, until my little sister began talking. As soon as she was old enough to form sentences, she began saying things that made everyone uneasy. She'd ask my parents to close her bedroom door at night because she didn't like the boy walking in the hallway. She described him casually like it was obvious. He walks slowly. He just looks at me. We brushed it off as imagination. Kids say weird things, right? And now the Daniel joke suddenly began to feel less funny. When I was about 14, my parents decided to rip up the newer flooring to restore the original hardwood. Anyone who's been to an old house knows that it means lots of work. We were sitting on the floor in the process when we uncovered yellow sheets and a small article about a boy named Daniel that had lived in our house decades earlier. The piece was short, almost clinical. It mentioned that he had developmental disabilities and that he died in an accident near the property. The room went quiet in the uncomfortableness. No one said anything. The newspaper was a creepy coincidence, though, given that for years we had an ongoing joke about the ghost's name. And it wasn't for a long while after that when we finally messaged our cousin and asked him why he was so weird about our house, did he tell us that the moment he went into the threshold, he got this awful feeling and that he decided he wasn't going to go in. One weekend I was at my parents' house. I was with my mother in the living room on the couch just talking. Suddenly I catch in the corner of my house something dark. It was pitch black. Not tall, short, didn't have a specific shape, not human shape. This thing jumped from that spot to another spot. I realized I just saw something. To understand the next part, I must explain the setup in my house. In the living room, we had a big table, big enough to fit 12 people. And on that table, my mother had a tablecloth. So after I saw that black thing jumping from that spot to the other spot, I looked at the tablecloth and saw it moving. I realized that what I just saw was real, and I started shaking and crying. I explained it to my mother and just tried to ignore it, as I could not do anything about it. After 3 days, my sister was in the bathroom. The bathroom is next to the living room, and I heard my sister screaming. I got curious and went to check on her. She came out screaming at me that we have a frog in the bathroom. I told her to calm down and that I would get rid of it. We grew up in the countryside, so I was used to frogs. I entered the bathroom, and as I saw the frog, I froze instantly. It was the largest frog I'd ever seen. It was huge, like a balloon. I began shaking and left. My mother had an acquaintance that was into odd stuff. They were not friends or anything, but she calls this woman and tells her about the frog. This woman told her to catch the frog and put it in a jar and close it, to keep it closed for 5 days, and if the frog doesn't die, she must go and leave it in the river. My mother did just that. The frog didn't die. I believed that the black thing I saw was the frog, but something was attached to the frog because the black thing was like the size of a 5-year-old. After this, nothing else happened. If you have any thoughts about what I'd seen, I'd love to hear it. My grandpa was somewhat into the paranormal, and he always said he would show signs from the other side before he passed. I grew up very close to my grandparents. I saw them nearly every day as a child, and think of them as my second parents. On the night before his funeral, I was trying to write a eulogy for him, and I wanted to use this paper I wrote on him in middle school. The assignment was to write about a character, and my grandpa absolutely fit that description. It got lost after many computer switches over the 20+ years since I wrote it, and my mum had searched for it for years as well. Then that night, as I was trying to write, my mum suddenly gets an idea of where to look. She pulls a specific box out of her storage and rifles through it, pulling out a paper copy of the very assignment. We read it with much laughter and crying, and I wrote my eulogy copying the assignment on my computer with minor edits. It was as if she had pulled the paper out of thin air. I fully believe my grandfather told her where to find it. Before I got married, I visited my grandparents' graves several states away with my husband and introduced him to them. It was meaningful and symbolic to me, if nothing else. A year later, I eloped in Mexico, and on the Dia de Muertos, November 2nd, we had our wedding dinner at the resort restaurant, and we walked through the decorations the resort set up, including multiple ofrendas. As we stood in line, my husband was being affectionate as usual and said, "You're my licorice," which is not his usual nickname for me, Jellybean. He looked stunned for a second as if he didn't know why he said that nickname, then corrected himself to "You're my Jellybean." I asked him why he said that, and then he honestly said, "I don't know. That was my grandpa's nickname for me. I never told him that." Dia de Muertos is meant to be when the veil is at its most thin between the realm of the dead and those alive, and ofrendas are apparently a pathway for loved ones to visit us from the other side. Could it have been my granddad, whispering in his ear? Before I tell my story, I'll start by saying that I do believe in the supernatural, but I am a huge skeptic and don't think these things are as common as people are led to believe. I think most encounters are just people's imagination, or simply explainable occurrences. Now, with that being said, I'm pretty sure what I saw was real, but I would not be surprised to find out I was wrong. So, my cousin and I decided to visit Japan back in 2018 for one of those gigantic Groupon tours, and during this part of the tour, we were at some gigantic shrine. The area for the shrine was enormous, and we were given a few hours to explore. Note that during these types of tours, you're with a group of people around, 10 to 16, and everyone is grouped by 2, and you travel around your touring country via bus and tour guide. We had been walking around this huge property for a while now, and it was almost time for us to meet back at the bus, so we went down a path we hadn't taken yet, but we knew it led back towards the entrance. While heading down that path, there was a fork in the road, and the way going left led down an area with a gate. But the gate was open, so we figured it was allowed to go down there, and thought we'd quickly go down this path because we did have some time left over. While going down there, we saw some of the people who were on the bus with us coming back up the path, so we asked them what was down there. They said it was just some graves and stuff, and me and my cousin decided it wasn't worth it to see some graves, so turned around and headed back with our tour mates. Note, it was kind of overcast, and it would very lightly sprinkle rain every now and then. On our way back, there being about 6 of us in total, we see 2 women dressed in kimonos sitting on a bench in the middle of the field. Now, this bench is about 15 to a maximum of 25 feet away in this field, and is clearly not in the best condition. It seems worn down. Also, this field is about half dirt, half grass. That is to say, it's not like a soccer field where it's clearly primarily grass. This is my first time in Japan, and I've never seen anyone in a kimono before, so decided to take up my brand new Google Pixel phone and take some pictures of the nice scenery, and my cousin and the people were deciding to do the same. As I'm taking the pictures and checking them, I keep noticing that they're blurry and can't seem to get a good shot. I mention this to my cousin, and she says the same thing is happening to her, and it's only their faces that keep getting blurred. It was the same with me, only the faces are blurred, and she was using the newest iPhone at the time. I made a comment about how it's kind of raining, so that's probably what caused it, and she agreed. Immediately after that, I hear one of the people we were with and his wife also complaining that their phones weren't taking pictures of the 2 women in kimonos, and they keep coming out blurry. This is when a chill went down my spine, because I told you in the beginning that I believe in the supernatural, but I'm highly skeptical of people's supposed encounters, and nothing like this has ever happened to me. But with that being said, I can't come up with a logical reason that these 4 people, 1 with a Google Pixel and 3 with iPhones, can't take clear pictures of 2 women about 20 feet away. Over the years, I keep trying to rationalize it, but I don't know, man. My dad is even more skeptical than I am about these things, and as soon as I told him this story, he instantly agreed that it might have been ghosts, because, in his words, those kind of things do happen out there. Also, the fact that what we thought only to be a shrine turned out to be a mass grave site didn't help matters. Before you ask, my cousin and I deleted the pictures because we both were kind of freaked out. So what do you think? Am I just overreacting? Could it have been a glitch on multiple people's phones? Something wrong in the area? The rain, maybe? Or might there have been a more spooky explanation to this? I went out with some friends one night, and somehow we ended up deciding to try one of those ghost apps called GhostTube. I'd never used anything like that before, and honestly, I didn't take it seriously. It felt more like something to mess around with than anything real. We started at a cemetery, figuring if the app was going to do anything, it would be there. For a while, nothing really happened. Just a few random words popping up that didn't connect to anything. That actually made me more skeptical. It felt exactly like what I expected. After a bit, we left and got back in the car. And that's when things started to feel weird, because the app didn't stop. Even as we pulled away from the cemetery, it kept lighting up, going red, beeping, acting like it was still picking something up. At first, we laughed it off, assuming it was just glitching or maybe reacting to movement or signal changes. But then I pointed my phone towards the trunk of the car. It immediately went red. And that's when the mood changed. We started testing it, moving the phone around the car. The signal would drop back to normal until I aimed it at the trunk again, and every time without fail it lit up. At that point we started talking to it, not because we fully believed it, but because we were curious. The words it gave us didn't make anything better. Most of them were random, but a few stood out. Jeremy, you are annoying. That one actually made us laugh for a second out of nerves, but that kept going. Satan, niece, van, pathetic. None of it formed a clear message, but it didn't feel completely random either. It was just enough to make you start connecting dots. And after I dropped my fence off, I expected everything to go back to normal, but it didn't. I was alone parked outside my house and I checked it again and got the same result. As long as I pointed my phone anywhere else, nothing happened. But the moment I aimed it at the trunk, it lit up red again. That's when it really got to me. I got out the car and walked around it, scanning everything. Doors, windows, under the car, nothing. It only ever triggered when it was by the trunk. I started thinking about the car itself. I had bought it used, and before that, it had been a rental. A lot of people had driven it, used it, and left things behind. My brain kept trying to come up with some kind of story, something that would explain why the trunk specifically was the only place to trigger a response. But there was nothing concrete. I went inside, but curiosity didn't go away, and after a while I checked the app again just to see if anything had changed. 2 words popped up. Certainly, demonic. That was enough for me. Whatever was happening, whether it was the app glitching or environmental interference or just my brain trying to make patterns of the randomness, I decided I had had enough and closed the app. And I haven't tried to communicate with it since. Has anyone else experimented with these kind of apps? My wife Jane and I had a true encounter at the Cecil Hotel in the 1980s. As a young married couple from New York vacationing in Los Angeles, California for several days without knowing its dark history. Now, the Cecil Hotel opened in 1924 downtown with 14 floors and many rooms, built first as a luxurious spot for wealthy travelers passing through. Due to the Great Depression, homelessness, and its spot near Skid Row, it quickly turned into a notorious hub for crime, people taking their own lives and mysterious deaths, earning nicknames like Hotel Death and the Suicide Hotel. That was when men and women down on their luck ended their lives there often alongside folks with psychiatric issues and drug addictions, seeking others in the same mess, living rough inside. In 2011, it was renamed to Stay on Main to shake up the bad reputation tied to murderers, serial killers like Richard Ramirez, who stayed and killed nearby in 1985, Jack Unterwagen in 1991, and as recently as 2013, the Elisa Lam mystery. We checked into the front desk, not knowing any of the history. Not until we researched it later. The clerk handed us the key to room 13, but when we saw the number, we told him we were superstitious, and both felt like it was bad luck straight off. So, he took the key back, and instead gave us the key to room 903, on a higher floor, saying it boasted a nice view of LA. With that, the young bellhop grabbed our luggage and took it upstairs by elevator. One of two old Otis elevator company ones still running smoothly. That was when I remembered that this was the early 1980s, so most hotels used metal keys for rooms, not plastic cards that came later. We stepped into our room, 903, finding it small but nice looking overall, holding that 1930s vintage style. My wife Jane and I found the persistence of the older style pretty cool, since we appreciated vintage. The room felt nice at first, but we found it strange and kind of unsettling how the room came painted blood red with big, glowing, blinking lights already on when we walked in. That was when Jane turned them off quickly, unable to handle the eerie blink going constantly, as neither of us were able to handle the eerie blink consistently. The first night and day at the Cecil Hotel passed fine, without a single odd thing crossing our minds or sleep. The night after that, when we were in bed, I saw Jane tossing and turning restlessly until she woke up with a start, sitting right up, holding her neck in fear of shaking. So she told me she felt hands around her neck that were tight, like someone was trying to choke her while she slept deeply there. I knew she was not joking around, from the real fear in her eyes was staring wide back at me. That's when I hugged her close and told her everything would be fine. Now, I'm not psychic, but I have a good sixth sense about places, and something about the hotel seemed a bit off from the moment I arrived. Jane and I went back to sleep after calming down. We were only asleep about an hour or so, when a rattling hit our door like someone was trying to break inside. I woke up fast and approached the door steadily, looking out the peephole, finding no one standing in the hallway. That was when, just as I turned back to bed disappointed, I saw a hotel bellboy in vintage uniform come down the hall through the peephole. Red hat, red coat, and then he turned the corner and was out of sight. I got out of the room quickly, still in pajamas, wanting to complain to him about all the noise outside our door so late, and when I turned the corner, there was no bellboy anywhere down the empty passage. That's when I knew it sounded far-fetched and crazy even to me, and I planned not to tell my wife after her choking scare. But since she faced that mysterious spirit in bed, it did not seem so wild to share what passed my view, and I told her of the phantom bellboy. We agreed that if anything else out of the ordinary happened, we would check out first thing in the morning. Our next couple of days at the Cecil Hotel were fine and without trouble, and on our last night there, after a nice dinner out, we returned, putting the hotel key in the door, opening it, and being shocked to see a young female pacing inside our room. She appeared to be in her late 20s with blue eyes and long golden hair, and looked like she was waiting for someone to arrive. We couldn't hear a sound come from her mouth, but her lips were moving. That's when she suddenly opened her eyes wide, terrified, and before we knew it, was gone, vanished completely. My wife and I could not make heads or tails of the situation, but decided to sleep there and check out of the hotel in the morning. While in bed, we started to hear faint sounds of a couple arguing. It was in the walls. The man sounded older and tough, and the female sounded young and sweet, crying. That was when we heard the slapping sounds, and then a knock at what sounded like the next door over of a young bellboy asking if everything was alright and that there was a lot of noise. We heard an angry, gruff man's voice reply that everything was fine. The arguing continued after the bellboy left, and then a huge crash of the window breaking, like someone trying to jump out of it. We think it was the young lady's spirit fretting earlier, and this was a replay of the horror she endured and the manner of which she decided to leave our world. We checked out first thing in the morning. My wife Jane and I researched New York City Library, finding the story of a young lady who jumped to the 9th floor and was 27 years old, Miss Pauline Otten, in October of 1962, arguing with her estranged husband Dewey, landing on innocent 65-year-old transient George Gianni, killing both instantly. So police first assumed it was a suicide pact, but he had his hands in his pockets, so it was unlikely. All in all, it was a creepy experience, and we never went back to that place. In my life, I have reluctantly had random occurrences of seeing, sensing, and hearing from or dreaming about people who have died. It's jarring and unwelcome. I won't share every experience here, but I will open up about my recent predicament that I'm seeking guidance on. We brought a lovely home from a couple that chose us for the property because of our environmental and farming values. The man built it by hand when he was in his 20s, now in their 70s, and they had to move closer to services since his dementia was progressing. He died this February. His wife and I had written to each other over the 5 years of living here. She invited us to the funeral so that we could learn more about the incredible person who built our house. At the service, the wife told a story that she saw her husband's form in their living room a few days after his death, staring at her and looking at peace. It was very heartfelt and real to her. Recently, I have seen an occasional form in our home that I often confuse with being my husband. I have seen a cat here since we've moved in, and we joked that when this man died, he'd visit the home. Well, it is clearly now the case. Any guidance? I always shut myself off when I feel or see a spirit, but this was a good man. Does anyone have any guidance? I really would like this man to move on.